Wasan Island on integral healing, and the team wanted to kind of participate in what I'm saying on the foundations of integral healing. So
it's with great pleasure that I introduce Professor Ashok, who is actually the sponsor of this course here at Haverford. And I've always been deeply grateful for his sponsorship and allowing the class to meet here under the auspices of the Global Dialogue Institute, which he's co-founder of. Professor Gangadine is the senior member of the philosophy department here at Haverford. He's been here close to 40 years, as young as he looks. Believe it or not, 40 years is an awful long time at one institution. And he's carried the light here on the Haverford campus, and as many light bearers at times meet opposition from people who don't like the notion of being illuminated by wisdom. And unlike many individuals involved in philosophy, he has a very deep spiritual vision that comes from an intuitive sense, not just from mind logic. And so I think that you'll find his talk this evening very enlightening and inspiring. Thank you so much for coming.
thanks, Howard, for that very lovely introduction.
My pleasure.
And pleasure to be with you. And what I want to do tonight is to speak for about an hour, or a little bit more than an hour, to lay out the central idea. And what I'm going to work on is the foundation. There's a missing foundation for integral medicine, integral healing, holistic healing across diverse worldviews. I'd like to begin by explaining what the issue is, what the problem is, what's missing, and why it's vital in terms of advancing integral healing to understand the missing foundation, and that there is a foundation. We use different terms. First of all, Dr. Posner has been a pioneer in the area of alternative medicine, integral healing. Just finding the right words is also already a problem. You know, what do you call it? Bringing different medical arts together. This seminar is Wisdom of the Healing Arts. It's a strange thing to go, what does wisdom have to do with healing? You know, if I ask you that question, you might be hard-pressed to understand that. And how much wisdom is there in medicine at this point? What is wisdom? What is consciousness? What does consciousness have to do with healing? In fact, the fundamental question is, does the mind, our mind, have anything to do with the healing process? And in the deepest way. And I want to fill that gap, because I think that's where the missing foundation is. And whether we say alternative medicine or integral healing, holistic healing, I want to play with those words for a minute to see what they mean, right? Because we know that there's a kind of central paradigm, a dominant paradigm of scientific medicine, allopathic medicine, whatever term you use, right, which dominates the scene, or at least has so far in the 20th century. And we also know that there's a profound shift taking place amongst citizens who are voting with their feet, and more alarmingly large numbers, not alarming to us, but really alarmingly large numbers are going to alternative therapies for their healing, right? And there's a kind of revolution afoot, a radical revolution in the medical art and healing art now. It's dramatic and shaking the grounds upon which we stand in terms of medical school training of future medical students and so forth. And so what's missing? Well, what most people do is, if they feel that yoga is good because it makes them feel good and it reduces stress, or a friend points out that there's a feng shui practitioner that insists that if you don't have your qi energy aligned properly, you're going to be off balance, your qi is going to be off focus. Or someone who really feels that the aroma, there's a kind of a whole aromatherapy. Through different scents, you could actually tap certain aspects of the body and the mind and heal through aromatherapy, right? And also massage techniques can be very important as a modality of healing. Of course, meditation, whether you call it yoga, whatever form of meditation, is supposed to be relevant somehow, right? So I'm mentioning already, so acupuncture, right? Some people say that acupuncture can really heal you. And it's hard to understand why and how, because that's not our physiology. What are all of these alleged centers or nerve centers or whatever it is acupuncture is doing? When a specialist, a scientist who practices this art, and it's an ancient art for thousands of years, right, that works, but it's not part of what's called scientific or allopathic medicine, right? So when you hear of these different therapies, I've just mentioned a few of many, many different modalities, and many different forms of healing. And what people usually do is they pick and choose a little of this, a little of that, and call that integral medicine. And it's really not, right? Because what I'm going to try and show of what's profoundly missing is that human beings live in worldviews. We all know that. We have a lens. We don't even realize that when we're raised in a culture, from even before we're born into a situation where we have to learn the language, the cultural language, is to be shaped in a certain mind space. Your mind space is being shaped by your culture and your language that you're learning. And we're not aware of that, right? To live in a culture is to have your consciousness shaped in a certain lens, almost like a plastic art. And when that lens is shaped, that's how you see yourself, that's how you experience, and that's how you see others, and that's the lens through which you interpret other cultures, other modalities, other worldviews. And the education we're getting is so wanting because we're never usually educated to understand the lens we have in a certain worldview. And we know that obviously there are different worldviews. But we're never educated, how do I cross? If I'm raised in a Judeo-Christian European American lens, what is that like? Oh, it's already complicated because many different worldviews have gone to shape the American culture. So as a typical student in Philadelphia, for example, studying at Bryn Mawr, Haverford, Swarthmore, right, in liberal arts, the typical person in America has many different lenses as part of being an American. Right? I'll talk about that. Right? But if you're raised in a Western cultural milieu with many different lenses, and if we have many lenses already, that's going to be important because if I'm raised as a Jew or a Christian, and I'm living in the biblical world, and that's one of the lenses I have, and it teaches me that God created the universe. Right? That's one way I see myself as a spiritual being in my religious identity and how I see others through that lens. But I'm also a scientist, a biologist, physicist, let's say a physicist. And I really, from the lens of physics and science, I know that the Big Bang seems to be the best shot we've got at explaining the cosmos and the universe. It began with a Big Bang. And the language of physics is a very different language and lens than my spiritual lens that says God is the creator and God is the beginning and the beginning is the word. So as a physicist, my identity as a physicist, seeing the world and my reality and experience and nature through that lens is profoundly different than seeing it as a Christian or a Jew in that lens. And I'm also a citizen, right, in America. And we know that one of the things about American civic democracy is that you want to keep your religion out of the politics. So as a civic American, you want to show up for the civic space of democracy of keeping religion on the sideline, which is already a deep stress point because my religion says that everything you do, everything you breathe, love God with all your heart and all your mind at every moment of your life. How are you going to check that in at the door when you show up as a citizen? Right, for voting in politics and democracy in conversation in the public space. That's a kind of a crack or a fault line with my identity as an American. So all of these stresses are working on me, right? And I'm hearing about other cultures too. As a student, I know about Hindu culture. I'm hearing about it. Yoga. Yoga is coming into the culture. It's being imported. And there's a real question, can we, when we import it into our lens, are we violating yoga, real yoga? What is real yoga? How do I cross into the Hindu world if I'm trained in the Judeo-Christian American scene? It's a very different space. The lens of the Hindu mind is totally different. It has a different view of time, a different experience of time. Time is cyclical. It's samsara. Boundless, beginningless, endless. It's not linear. It's not you're born and then you die, and that's the line that you travel. It's a cycle in which everyone is lodged in samsara right? And the whole point of that teaching is to break out of the cycle of samsara, which is a kind of bondage, into nirvana, to be liberated out of that cycle and stop the cycle of birth and rebirth. So there's reincarnation, transmigration, all of these words that are part of that mental space, they're foreign to our worldview. So how do we enter the Hindu mind? How do we enter, and in that world, it's giving us a certain view of what is reality. It's saying, Om is real. Om is the fundamental reality. I'll talk about that in a moment, how all of these great traditions, of course, if we could step back, what I'm doing very quickly is giving a sense of how do you integrate medicine across borders? When the worlds are so profoundly different, the languages are different. And not just a language, I mean language in a deep sense, the language that shapes reality. That's called ontology. Ontology is a deep science of reality, of what is real. And every worldview carries a code as to what reality is and shapes our experience. So literally what I'm experiencing as a human being in a cultural setting is going to be different. A Hindu person is experiencing reality in a profoundly different way than someone who's raised in a very different cultural space. So a culture on the outside is really reflecting a shape, a mindscape, an ecology of mind, an interior architecture that colors, it's our lens that shapes everything in my life and how I interpret other people. And if I enter the Buddhist world, that's still different from the Hindu world. And I'll talk about that in a moment, if you were to how you cross worlds. So in other words, for me, as a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim, to enter into the Buddhist world, I must somehow step back from my lens for a moment and morph my mind into that different lens to try it out, to understand it, and see the world through the eyes of the Buddhist lens. Profoundly different. Their reality is shunyata, empty. It doesn't believe in objects as ultimately real. The things that make up our world that we take to be ultimately real, including ourselves. I'll talk about that as well. So to enter into the Buddhist world, it's a very different transformation of the mind. And we're not even educated in this. So the question is, how do we access different worlds? If I go into certain African cultures, their whole way of understanding reality and what is fundamental and nature and self and healing is going to be different. Its science is going to be different. That's the point I'm making. If you enter the Chinese mind, how do you do that? That has for millennia been shaped by Tao and Qi. That Tao is the fundamental reality. And that Qi is the energy of the universe, and Yin and Yang, all of these terms, right? Different world. How does a human being get visualized? What is her anatomy? When we study science, science is just one lens. That's the point I'm making. It's not that science doesn't have science. What we call science now has evolved over thousands of years and is still evolving dramatically. I'll talk about that too. When you move from Newton to Einstein, that's a deep shift in the lens. To go from Newton's world to Einstein's world, and now to the next frontier that's opening up of entering the grand unified field of physics and nature, right? So science itself is morphing and changing under the influence of these other forces, and it has always been that way. But when you realize that science, what we take to be facts from science, are part of a lens, once you see that, then you start questioning, now why should that lens and that way of experiencing the world be privileged and take center stage and dominate all the other thousands of years of human experiments and cultures that have their own science? Because yoga is science, it's a profound science. It sees itself as a science, as an ultimate science of consciousness, right? And in terms of the qi, the language of qi, and acupuncture, and the ancient arts of Chinese medicine that understands the power of herbal remedies, for example, and the Ayurvedic Hindu classical ancient science. It's scientific, it's been tested, it's been affirmed and confirmed over thousands and thousands of years, right? So when we say science rules as we know it, it's a very small piece of a larger global picture. And when we see that the lens of science is one lens under profound shift and pressure to shift, then we begin to ask, why should that lens be the only lens? And could it be a better lens? Could it become more integrative? How would it be for science to become a more integral dynamic? Right? These questions have not been properly asked, nor have they been addressed. So what I'm going to do in this first hour is to lay out very quickly a large picture, right, of what has been evolving over 2,000-3,000 years in opening up this deep space where worlds meet. It's an issue that has not been properly faced. So when you get some of the pioneers in the field of integrative healing, like Dr. Posner, like people like Deepak Chopra, you've heard of Deepak Chopra, who's speaking about mind-body medicine. And he uses the language of quantum healing, taking it from science, because quantum reality opens up a different view of reality as a deeply interconnected, dynamic, shifting, changing field. And if you go into that field, then consciousness and body meet. But in our everyday life, we have the way we see the world in a common sense way. The common sense lens that we have, right, I'm going to show, is a big problem. Because all of the great traditions have noticed that if you stay in the common sense lens that we're in, it fragments, it breaks, it divides, it separates. And when that happens, you are broken. Humans are not whole beings. Your mind and your body and your spirit are not integral. So the question I started with about what is integral healing, what is integral medicine, and if you take a little from this and a little from that, from your lens, you could see what the problem is, right? If I'm in my lens and I say, I'd like to do a little yoga, and you do it through your lens, you're not entering the Hindu world where yoga was born, and you're not doing that science on its own terms. You're getting some deformed and distorted view of what yoga is if you practice it through your own privileged cultural lens. If you say, I want to do acupuncture, and you go to a specialist, and it's a very different world, and you're receiving it through this lens, how do you you're blocking the medicine. So here are a number of problems, deep problems that we don't think about, that are really affecting our wholeness and our health, that has to be reckoned with in talking about healing a whole person. How do you heal a whole person? Because I'm suggesting that everyday people are profoundly broken. If I'm living in multiple lenses as an American, and part of me, I could see the pro-choice and the pro-life. Those are two different worldviews. The person who says abortion is murder, end of the story, is using a certain lens, a biblical lens. A person who's speaking about choice is using a different lens. American democracy, freedom. No one should legislate and take away my freedom. That is an ultimate value. See what I mean? So that is a battle of worldviews. And if my lens colors my whole language, then I have no words in common with another lens. And if I have no words in common, how can we communicate? We can't. I can't even communicate with myself. See? So once you realize there are different worldviews and they're profoundly different, and they have a different shape, and they don't know how to mediate and connect because they don't have any common language. They have no common terms. And if you're in that situation, then it's broken. You are broken in your identity. We know from psychoanalysis that a schizophrenic person has multiple identities, right? And we can diagnose schizophrenia or bipolar, whatever the names are for persons who are mood swings and shifts in their life, right? But from an ontological point of view, that's my field. Ontology studies reality, how it's formed, the language of reality. What are the forces of worlds? How do they connect? Can we cross worlds? Can we integrate worlds? Is there a common ground? How do we dialogue across worlds? And it's an ultimate question for us in the 21st century at all, because our survival turns now upon facing and solving these issues. Because we know so things like 9/11 is just one little example of the clash of worldviews. Literally, the striking of those airplanes into the Twin Towers, right, in terms of the clash, and right afterwards, of course, civilization clashing, Islam and the West, is the way it's built, right? It's trying to realize that they're profoundly different realities that can't speak, so violence breaks out at that point. and there's no conversation. So war is the only, just violence is the response. So if worldviews can't connect in dialogue, we're broken inside because we're multiple identities. My identity as a physicist, my identity as a citizen, my identity as whatever I'm doing, you see what I mean? It's going to be a different ID. And if I can't have inner dialogue, then I'm going to be multiple. And we live on those fault lines of just being multiple without being able to integrate. So I'm trying to bring out, when I say what is missing, that if you're speaking of integral medicine and healing, we must look at the human being and the ontological condition of the person. Because if my being is busted, if my being is wounded, if my being is fragmented, then I'm in pieces. And a fragmented person cannot be whole. And if you just think of the words of well-being, right? Happiness. What is happiness? Wisdom. Here's the connection with wisdom. Wisdom and the healing arts. Think of the title of the seminar. There's a lot of wisdom there, right? If wisdom is the highest fulfillment of philosophy, and philosophia is loving Sophia. Sophia is wisdom. Wisdom is intelligence, knowledge, integral knowledge. Wisdom is not the same as knowing. When we know local information, right? Always in our lens. But wisdom seeks to be whole and to see the whole picture and to be holistic. But to get wisdom in a global world, you've got to find common wisdom across the worlds. How do you combine the wisdom of China, the wisdom of India, the wisdom of Africa, indigenous wisdom, the wisdom of Europe, the wisdom of our great spiritual traditions? How do we connect those? Do you see what I mean? So partial wisdom is not wisdom. So if we are broken as beings, then we can't have well-being. And if we can't have well-being, we can't be happy and fulfill and whole. So the word whole means healing. And so the whole person must be healed. But medicine across borders hasn't really reconciled or come to terms with that. So go back to where we are. If I'm practicing, if I'm realizing my scientific medicine, what we're calling medicine right now, scientific allopathic medicine, is prescribing medication for me, and Dr. Posner has pointed out, right, the destructive potentially. It's good. It has its good points, no question about it. Right? I'm not putting down science, because science, I mean, it saved me. I've had eye surgery that saved my eyes, right? And I have had infections in which I've taken medication from Dr. Posner and so forth. So I think it's a wonderful miracle, and they're miracle drugs. And there's miracle surgery and technology. It's all miraculous and wonderful. I just want to say that, right? But it may not be doing the whole job. You might have symptoms in your being. You may be depressed. You may be depressed. Why? Not just because you have a brain chemical disbalance. It may be you're depressed because your life isn't working. Your life is broken. You can't put it together. You can't get your act together. Right? You have different pulls. Your body pulls you one way. Your consciousness pulls you another. You're a student. You want to study, but you want to dance, right? And so, but your body, you're not together. Your mind and body are not integral. How do you integrate your mind and body? Truly, ontologically, as one being. Can you imagine if your mind and body were so communicating and in communion that you could just feel such deep peace and harmony, which is, of course, what something like Tai Chi is attempting to do. When you're moving with the Tai Chi, when you're moving with the Chi and you're integrating it, right? Your consciousness and your body is flowing in unison at that time. See what I mean? That's an art. But what I'm trying to get at is integral medicine has a number of deep issues it has to face, and the foundation needs to be opened up for a common language to bring our worlds together. So there are two kinds of integration. Personal integration, how do I integrate my life and my being across the multiple lenses that I have? That's one. But my healing is not just I alone. I'm in a society. I'm in a community. I'm in a polis, the Greek word for a community. And a community can be sick. There can be cultural illness. A whole culture can be deformed. And when you think about some of the holocausts we've had on the planet, of sick cultures, right, of what humanity, people have done to each other, right, in the Nazi Holocaust, just to pick out one, right, think about what that meant, a culture was participating in profound violence as a group. And Rwanda, and in India and Pakistan, East Timor, Bosnia, ethnic cleansing, right? Middle East, Palestine, Israel, worldviews colliding, perspectives non-negotiable. I'm just trying to give you just brief glimpses that this is very serious. The world is unsustainable with a clash of civilizations at this level if we can't dialogue. So society needs to heal. You can't have a healthy being if you're in a sick society. See what I mean? So the community has to heal. But how is a community going to heal if the people are busted? So it's not just my own inner problem of being fragmented and needing integration and healthy inner dialogue to combine my different worlds to be a whole being. That's one issue. And I'm suggesting that genuine healing has to heal the whole human being at that deep level. It's not good enough to pick a little bit of feng shui, a little bit of yoga, a little bit of tai chi, a little bit of acupuncture, right? And a little bit of herbal medicine, a little bit of aromatherapy. You see what I mean? And then I go and see my physician for an x-ray and get and then I'm doing integral medicine. That is not integral medicine. That's the first one I want to stress. And if we can't find a stratagem to really integrate our worldviews, we're in big trouble. Okay? So the individual must heal. That's one issue. Culture must heal. My cultural situation. And the question is, how do you have a cultural healing? We know America is busted. You could see at the election time, last time when counting the ballots, the precipice of anger, when people were not talking across party lines. And if our civic space is multicultural, we say we're a multicultural society, and we honor diversity. Well, there's a kind of pathological diversity, because diversity doesn't mean that the African persons go there, the Asians go there, and the gays go over here, and whatever group you're in, you go into your separate enclave, and live and let live. That's not diversity. That's fragmentation. And we know at Haverford College is a Quaker community, where we allege to be a community in Swarthmore and Brim. We're supposed to be the bastions of holding the highest standards of community. And if we can't talk to each other across these lines and have real dialogue, it doesn't mean we agree. There needs to be diversity, difference, but common ground. So when we say in America, one nation, under God, indivisible, right? That kind of indivisible. We're talking one people, united. And the premise of democracy is that there's power to the people. But if the people are scattered and broken, there are no people. It's just little fragments. And therefore the power gets lost, and you can see what's going on now in the political scene. Democracy is in deep trouble. Democracy requires deep dialogue across to be integral for a healthy democracy to flourish. I'm trying to give you a sense of the scope of the issue. Integral healing is not just a matter of picking and choosing and then that's it. It's a profound issue. Is there a foundation? Is there a deep logic, a science of integrating our different worldviews? And it's not just an academic question. It is the most pressing question for our survival. Personal health, public health, community health, cultural health, and intercultural survival and health. Not to mention nature, right? We know that in terms of the environmental movement and the consciousness, we're violating nature tremendously. We're in deep trouble with global warming, pollution. That affects our health too. The planet, the melting polar ice cap, is a result of our behavior on the planet. So people say we're raping and violating nature. And nature, many cultures say, is living. It's Gaia. It's like a person. It's sacred. It should be honored. Right? So if we're violating nature too, not to mention each other, in every respect, we're destroying our ecology, our living ecology. I'm not trying to paint a grim picture. I'm just trying to state an issue that we have to face. I'm going to end up in a very positive note. All of my presentation is going to be at a very high level of, say, answering that question and showing what I think we need to do. So I'm going to go up to the blackboard and start drawing some pictures and telling the story in a fast-forward way, and then I'll pause. It'll probably take me about 50 minutes to get this all up there. to give a picture of 3,000 years of evolution, and I'm going to suggest that there's a deep space, a common ground that we're about to enter into that's been coming for millennia, but we finally are getting the tools to enter it, that is the source of different worldviews, the common ground of integral healing, and the missing foundation. And there's a grammar, a language that is vital to enter that, and I'm going to try and present that right now. So here's a way of summing up what I've said so far, very briefly, all that I've said so far. That when you're a student or living in a culture, the first thing you learn, and this is what you learn in logic and philosophy, is that there's a space of thinking, a thought space, right? And to think, logicians say, logic is a science of consciousness. And one of the things I want to do is to kind of make a clear link and a clear case. What is the link between mind, consciousness, healing, and wisdom, right? That's a missing link. And some of the people I was mentioning, in addition to Dr. Posner, Deepak Chopra, Larry Dossey, some of them are your reading list. Dean Ornish, Andrew Weil, John Kabat-Zinn, who was at Haverford recently, a graduate of Haverford. He's having a revolutionary impact in medical schools by bringing in consciousness and meditation into the healing medical process, right? These are people who are doing marvelous work in the field. But when I try to draw, what is the foundation of your intuition? I've had Deepak Chopra on my television show, about a month ago. It'll come out next month. The interview, a 1-hour interview, right? And I really appreciate his important contribution. But many of these people are like visionary artists who somehow intuitively know what integral means, and they practice it, and they write about it, and they're administering it. But when you try to bring out, how do you do it? How do you answer the question? How do you integrate different worlds? They draw blank. They don't have the equipment to do it. And that's really what I want to focus on today, to make that link between mind, healing, and the healing arts. So just imagine this space that most of us live in, and we haven't even had a picture of it. But logicians and philosophers have focused tremendous energy and understanding the space of thinking. So consciousness, if you had to study the science of consciousness, logic, and this is where ontology, so there are two fields, logic and ontology. That's my primary training started out that. Logic is a science that studies the shape of consciousness and thinking and understands the laws of thought. Ontology, ontos means being, and logos is science. That's a science word. Ontology, physiology, psychology, right? You put that. So ontos, logos, ontology is the science of being. It's a science of what is real. And that gets you into worldviews. And it's all happening in this space. And most of us don't even know. But philosophers have seen that in trying to civilize thought space, what is thinking? Well, thinking is joining items, terms, usually called the subject and the predicate. Whenever we have a thought, this is thought space, we are joining, affirming, and subjects and predicates. Socrates is wise. The chalk is white. Rain is falling. I am a man. Greeks are mortal. You name it, right? This is where we're thinking. And so the logic as a science of consciousness gives us the laws of thought. And one of the point about the laws of thought is, how do we think correctly? How do we know, in our culture, how to put items of thought together and make sense? This is where we make sense, meaning. And if you think about it, if you take many of our words from English, when you're learning English from day one, and your mother, father, siblings are telling you, this is chalk, chalk is white, chalk is for writing, and telling you all of these things, and you're getting the information, you're learning how to process that information. That's what language learns, until you can make the sentences by yourself, right? The child will see a different piece of chalk. Oh, chalk is pink, and pick up it and use it. Now the child is learning the grammar. So there's a logical grammar of putting down things, ideas together, concepts together, thoughts together. And that's where you manufacture thinking. That's where you make sense. And this is where your worldview shows up, right? And most of us live there. And if you play with this for a minute, many of the words that we put together, right? And you start to scramble them in unheard of ways. Just try that for a minute. Take 7, and let's say 7 is blue. Suppose I say 7 is blue. Well, that's nonsense. Because 7 is an invisible, not physical thing. It's a concept, it's a number. Color is something physical. I can't apply color to something like that. Right? If I say triangularity is at the door, it doesn't make sense. Quadruplicity drinks procrastination. Right? If you start to play with words and put them together, most of them don't make sense. So how do we learn the laws of sense? That's a culture. Suppose I say the desk is alive. No, that's a big mistake. The desk is a piece of wood. It's inert. It's dead. Right? You go into a different culture. When I arrived at Haverford, my field is worldviews and how we put the way we put ideas together shapes meaning. So the way a Hindu is thinking, when you get samsara, nirvana, dharma, karma, the language, the Hindu grammar is a profoundly different grammar than the one we're speaking. So what's making sense in their grammar does not make sense for us in our grammar, right? So that when that was really what I was studying, I realized our science, our philosophy didn't give answers to the question, how do you decode different worldviews then? That was not answered. When I arrived on the scene in 1965 at Brandeis University to study, right, and I came at Haverford in 1968 as a young professor, studying logic and ontology and asking the question, how do worlds form? What are the laws of shaping a world? I had no answers. That research was not done. So that's been my life, to try and understand, how do you get the DNA? Can you imagine, to use a metaphor, if I could get the DNA of the Hindu grammar or the DNA of the Chinese mind and decode it and lay it out and show, here's what it looks like. Right? And that would be an incredible way of being saying, okay, maybe how do I then cross into that world? Is there a way to morph my lens to go, right? That's really what I was trying to explain. So I'm just trying to give you a quick picture to give more specificity to what I was saying about how our lens are shaped and how different cultures show up in a very... So this is like the screen of awareness. This is thought space, so this is what I'm aware of. This is like how I see my world and myself. And there's a me here that we usually don't even realize. There's a me who is present, almost like a lens. Here's a lens. My mind has been shaped, and this is my culture space. And I have multiple lenses shaping. So when I arrived at Haverford, next door to my office, Professor Wyatt McGaffey, an anthropologist working in Africa, right, a very eminent anthropologist, would say when he would go to meet in certain villages and to speak to native speakers, they would say, this stone is spirit. As a trained scientific anthropologist in science, having his own lens, he would say, well, we know stones don't have spirit. So what am I to do as an anthropologist, to be honest about their world? If I'm representing their world, how do I present it? Do I say they have the superstitious belief that trees are spirits, or that animals have spirit, or are part of the community, or that a stone is a sacred place, a sacred site of spirit? You can't. That's a category mistake. You probably have not heard of a category mistake, but a category mistake is a profound mistake when you do bad grammar and put things together that can't go together, and you get nonsense. When you get nonsense in your language, in your thought space, that's a category mistake. Right? So what is category correct for one grammar is category incorrect for another. So how are you going to judge? Are those native speakers who are seeing nature as alive and sacred, and that the buffalo, the Native Americans, who see the buffalo as sacred, and the river is spirit flowing? Or you go to India, the Ganges, and you bathe in the Ganges and you're cleansed and you're whole, right? Or you see that Shiva is in this site in nature. So nature is filled with spiritual consciousness. What kind of a world is that, right? Is it nonsense? And should our world rule the particular one we have? See, that's the kind of question I'm trying to get. But now here's the trick. Most of us don't even realize that we're at the edge here, being shaped in a lens and multiple lenses, so that the point about the different worlds that I've been talking about, the one that I'm a practicing Jew or a Christian, I'm a physicist, I'm an American citizen, and I'm you could just see the multiple lenses that I was trying to talk about before, right? So that as a, as a person who's a believing Christian or Jew, one story is God created the universe. Imagine what that means. It means that the world is a creature. The world is an art is created by God, and God is holding that world together. That's a different world than the world of the physicists that say there was some kind of event of a Big Bang. It was energy. It was not consciousness in the beginning. And it just went out, and after unimaginable time, the energy settled down, and somehow life came out of this accidentally, right? And so certain subatomic connections took place. Life came out of that by accident, and then the rest is history, and here we are. So that explains a kind of evolution. You know, that's a very different predication story than this one. See what I mean? That's what I mean about a different ID. So the one is an American citizen, where I'm a civic American, and I said, I'm keeping my religion out of this place here, okay? So what I was suggesting then, of all of these different worldviews and lenses, I'm trying to give you a vivid picture of when you're in the space, how things will divide into different worlds, and you know, all of them gives a different ID. I'm going to develop this. I'm still giving you an overview, okay? This is going to accelerate. It takes a while to launch because I'm talking about 3,000 years of evolution. And it's going to go very quickly as I move. But so I wanted you to get used to thinking about this space, because most of us live here, right? And we never even realize that, oh, I'm here and I have a lens, and I could try on different lenses. We don't even get this consciousness. To become conscious that I'm a thinker and that this is a screen. So usually most of us live out there in the world. You know, we were raised in the culture, we're experiencing the objects, and we process ourselves out there too. So when if I had to tell you about myself, I would tell you that I'm a male, an American, I was born, so, and I'll give you all of my predications. You don't even realize that. If you ask me, who am I? When I think of myself, I process myself here as well. And what am I? I'm a bundle of information. And I can tell you my story. I have a narrative about myself. Right? And I have a lot of hurts and, you know, good times and all of those feelings and emotions, and all of that's part of a predication story. So if I give you my ID, my ontological ID, and says, who am I? Who really? I will tell you my and I can say, well, I'm a Christian. I believe Jesus is a savior. I'm a Swarthmore student, and I'm a major in pre-med, and I'm doing biology and physics, and I'm doing all of the different subjects. That's another matter. Each subject is going to be opening up a different dimension, right? When you're doing mathematics, you're supposed to be doing something that connects with physics and reality, but what's the link between mathematics and right? You go into poetry and you're studying rhyme and meter and literature and language and the aesthetics, and you do arts and fine arts. So what's the connection with music? That's already important, right? Because we know that music can be a great healing power. And there's a yoga of sound. And so that vibrations can be healing. So when the liberal arts are already shaping different disciplinary languages. So if you try to do interdisciplinary studies, right, you're trying again the same issue. How do I combine the disciplines to find integral liberal arts? And we don't do it, right? You take your different subjects and you take a few of these, a few of these, a few of these, and 4 years have gone. It says you're a liberally educated person, and you know. And other than a moment like this, having a wisdom in the healing arts that's talking explicitly about integration, right? You could ask the question, can you integrate the liberal arts? Is there a common foundation to the liberal arts? So that when I'm doing art and music and mathematics and logic and poetry and vibration and mathematics and ratio and music and measure, rhyme and reason are all profoundly connected, right? We don't explore that. That's another version of what we're talking about. But here's the point. Most of us don't even realize that we are here as a thinker, and this is the screen. We live in this box, and we don't even reflect who am I very often, but when we form our own story about ourselves, that becomes our ontological ID, and we think of ourselves here, and we have all the information, and my story continues to grow. And the more distinguished I am, I got honors in my major, right? When I graduated from high school, I had all of these recognitions. I was valedictorian, right? And all of these things make me very unique, and that's my ID. But all of the great traditions of spirituality have seen that if you live in this box, you're condemned. You really are in a bad way. That's what I want to say. If you go into the origin of the Chinese wisdom, it says that in the beginning is Tao. They usually are speaking to the person who uses this language. But when you say, and here's the point I'm trying to make, is that all wisdom, the wisdom of the planet for millennia, if you step back from your own lens and say, what's been going on the planet? Let me look into the Chinese situation. You would find that these great seers were somehow going into a deep space where they were seeing a reality at a profound level, not that common sense. And so they was trying to give that vision of our deep reality. That's wisdom. So the Chinese wisdom is Tao. The Tao that is named is not the Tao. It's the opening line of the Tao Te Ching. The Tao, the infinite Tao, the fundamental reality, there's a unifying force of reality. And in the Chinese grammar, it's called the Tao. And out of the Tao, you have Qi. And the Yin, all of that language is going on here at this level. And if warning immediately is, if you name it in your ego everyday consciousness, it's not the Tao. So if I put Tao here and do my Tao studies, not the Tao. You go switch over to the Hindu wisdom. What has been going on there for millennia? These great minds have been seeing Om is primary reality. That's really, reality is Om. Meditate on Om as reality, and you'd be liberated from being caught in the box. And if you go into the Om grammar, you would hear a whole language of Brahman. Brahman is reality. The ego is not the true self. This ID that we have, everyday people, Hindu wisdom is saying, if you buy into this and subscribe literally to the being in the box, and think of what that means. It means you're an object, you're an entity. You're a bundle of these information properties that you've made into your story, and the tape of your story is you. And people believe that's who I am. If you buy that, this wisdom says you are condemned. You're going to be cut off from reality because reality is Omish. What does that mean? It's profoundly unified. It's Brahman. It's infinite Brahman, infinite spirit. And the self that can break out of the box into that, that's called Atman. The name for this self is Jiva, the everyday ego self. The ego that sees itself as separately existing and has this ID and processes itself here. This self is not the awakened self. So the journey of wisdom is going out of the box into this way of being, into the being place. And that's where you come to be, truly. Right? So I'm just giving you one quick story. If you read the Bhagavad Gita, for example, it's the dialogue between this voice speaking to this voice. Arjuna, you know how the Bhagavad Gita begins? I'll give you a couple examples of this to make it real, that move from here to there. This is what I'm trying to, right, what I'm leading up to is that all of these different traditions have been saying that, and I'll get back to the Gita in a minute, let me just finish this idea, because when you go into the Buddha's language, Buddhist thought and wisdom, Buddha's awakening was recognizing that if we treat ourselves as an object in the ego way and believe that, we're going to be caught in a web of separation, alienation, and suffering. So when Buddha awakened, that's what Buddha means, awakened one. So consciousness awakens out of this place. And this is like a cave of life. Buddha gave 4 fundamental axioms that sums up his wisdom for healing. He was a physician. He saw that everyday people were suffering and ill. They had sick being. And he was trying to prescribe how the pathway to becoming an integral being, a whole being, and therefore to end the suffering. That was Buddha. He was a physician. And his prescription is very simple, the 4 noble truths of Buddhist thought. Existence is suffering. Ego existence. This is the place of existing. Everyday existence. Existence is suffering. It has a cause. The cause is ego attachment, believing you're an ego. There's a way to get out of it. That's the 3rd noble truth. We have a choice. We can continue to choose and volunteer to stay here in the ego place and treat and live as an object, as a being, as an entity, or you can choose to rehabilitate your mind and your consciousness through pathways. And that's the fourth noble truth, the 8 pathways to becoming an awakened mind and entering into the field of reality. That's Buddha's, that's all Buddhist thought. And how do you do that? What are the eight pathways? Right thinking, right meditation, right judgment, right discernment, right livelihood, right practice, everyday practice. When you're conducting your mind in an awakened, mindful way at everything you do, your mind will break this barrier, the ego barrier, and enter into the space of shunyata. Shunya in Sanskrit is zero, and shunyata is zero-ness. And it's trying to say that to enter into true reality, you have to, none of these words, it's empty of this. None of these tags or boxes, or think about what words are. When you label something, Socrates is wise, you're putting this information is always in pieces, in categories. I'll get to that in a moment. There's something about, I'm just trying to give you a preliminary diagnosis and a consensus that as you start to look across the planet, all the great wisdom traditions were recognizing a fundamental prescription. That life here that isn't awakened is a life of suffering, separation from integral reality. And that fundamental reality is integral and connected and interconnected and interwoven. And when you're egoing, you're breaking all the circuits and breaking out of reality in some violent way. So egoing is a kind of violence, a deep violence that causes suffering and alienation. Right? That's really what's diagnosed. And there's a way to cure that illness, that ontological illness, and come into connectivity. So that the Tao is an infinite field, and what you typically get, there's a consensus of wisdom, global wisdom, as you begin to hear them. They're very different strategies. Hindu thought, the dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna, is not the same narrative that you get from Buddha. Right? And that there are many other traditions that I'm going to just quickly mention. They're very different, but the net effect is the ego box is a place of suffering and illness, and being in the cave, and not being awakened, not being a critical thinker, and not being able to be coherent and connected. It's a disconnection, and hence violence. And their strategies to come out of the box into wholeness and unity and flow and integrity and therefore compassion. And that's where the healing takes place. So Buddha's point it was that if you could experience shunyata, enter into the space, what do you find when you leave the box? What is reality like out of the box? And their point is reality is out of the box. And they try to develop a grammar, a deeper grammar for reality. So the shunyata language, what is Buddha's insight? All things are interconnected and co-arising. Things, when you believe in separate existing things, especially yourself, and that's a being that exists in itself, that myth, that belief breaks you out of the co-arising, which means what? Everything is arising with everything else in a dynamic interrelational play. And when you experience yourself in that dynamic field, then you get real. And when you get real, you are in sync and in flow, and that's when the healing of your being takes place. That's when you have well-being. That's nirvana. Nirvana is a place of healing and integrity. It's a place of compassion. In the deep sense of compassion, it means I can't experience myself apart from you. When I realize my interconnectivity with you and experience it, then I can't me without you. I enter into what's called an I-thou connectivity. I'm inseparable. I can't sever myself from you. And when I do, that's compassion. And when I live in compassion, in the space of compassion, which is when my mind wakes up and is flowing with the web of reality, I'm experiencing my interconnectivity. And when that happens, I must take care of you. I can't take care of me without taking care of you. And the healing begins between people. So that's a Buddhist community of healing and a prescription for humanity. Someone's using a loudspeaker out there. So I'm just building up. So if you enter into the Judaic tradition, right, there's an incredible breakthrough in culture where in the birth of the Judaic tradition. Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one. Right? That's a start. Yahweh. You shouldn't even write it. And the reason why you don't write it, even write the name of God, is because it's going to be written here in the place of everyday writing. And if you download the infinite word, the infinite spirit in the finite space, and you don't realize what you're doing, you're violating the infinite word by crunching it down. So when you speak of God, and you say God is great, and God is infinite, and God is merciful, and God is love, and you're God talking, and you're predicating on God, right? And you're even worshiping God, but you have God in the box. You may not realize that there's a profoundly violent act of trying to contain the infinite word, the infinite spirit, in an object of culture in your lens. The infinite word is far too great to be put into a name or into the box, right? And yet that's what people do. And you can see where it's going to lead. Because if they're different names, is it Allah? What is Allah? The infinite. And Islam is to surrender. The essence of Islam means surrender to God. What is surrender? You have to surrender this. The primacy, you have to surrender your perspective as primary and to say, I want to see it. Not my will be done, thy will be done. It's a very profound shift. So the call of Israel, love God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might. What does that mean? It means you can't put your agenda first. You can't put your story. You can't put your lens first. You've got to somehow open up in a profound way. And that's what faith is. Faith is not something the ego does. Faith is a letting go of the ego priority to understand the higher. So that's where you get a story like Abraham and Isaac as the founding of the Judaic faith. What is that story about? Who is Isaac? Well, you see the same pattern. Isaac is the one who is loved by Abraham more than anything. He finally got his son. It means everything to me. And God is saying, Abraham, place me first, love me, and I call on you to surrender Isaac. And of course, Abraham, originally just thinking in this way, thought, I've got to kill my son, and thinking it that way literally. But what God was trying to say, are you going to put me first or your agenda first? What you love first or what, right? I mean, Abraham in his deep struggle for all humanity said, I'm going to put you first. Whatever it takes, I'm going to surrender. I'm going to give it up for you. And that's when, of course, God said, okay, you've done it. You don't have to kill your son. Didn't mean that, right? So it wasn't a matter of, but it was a shift in the attitude to realize that there's a different way to put this first rather than this first, right? That's all, they're all saying that in different ways. So whether it's Allah, surrender to Allah, or the whole Islamic, or Yahweh, whatever, there have been many names. And again, since we process them here in our languages, in this space, we have different worlds. So you have the Judaic world, you have the Christian world, and they all break down into many different sects. So you have the Catholic, and you have the Protestant, you have the Baptist, and the Lutheran, and then they're also battling it out, right, in terms of reformations and so forth, not to mention between the Judaic-Christian lines, and what's going on between the Christian and the Jew and the Muslim, right? And you go on, you mention all the different religions, the Hindu, the Buddhist, they're all, and then Hindu and Buddhists are fighting, and Muslims and Hindus are killing each other in India, in the partitioning of India, right? It's not that the East has wisdom and the West doesn't. The same kind of egoing goes on. So when India was split and Gandhi was trying to get people to go here, ahimsa, non-violence, is attempting to bring the Om teaching into the cave of humanity. That's what the non-violent ahimsa is. Right? And Gandhi was doing an incredible job of bringing that wisdom into he said that if you understood this, and that's what the Bhagavad Gita was, his playbook, it was his manual. The Gospels and the Gita were his two manuals that he was working with to demonstrate the technology of bringing this power into the everyday culture in a non-violent way. He understood that if you stood in this truth, you could move mountains. And they all say that, right? That formula, there's certain formulas that begin to come out now, that, and you say it in the Christian way, if you have one mustard seed of this, you can move mountains. That's a technological point. And we're going to see why that science has been borne out. Right? And Gandhi was going to say that's the power of one, and each of us has that power. And if you could download that power into society, you can profound changes can come about in the human situation for healing, a nonviolent change. That's what Gandhi was. But then again, the Hindus and the Muslims were at war with their worldviews and partitioned India, and literally cut it, right, to develop Pakistan, and so you have that, and it's still fighting going on. It broke his heart, Gandhi's heart, because he said they missed the point when India was split, motherland, right? But that's a metaphor. I'm just trying to show you that when you take this truth and you misappropriate it and you put it into your boxes, abysmal violence continues. And so the religions are at war. And here's the point. I mean, all of the mystics of all the tradition, you go into the Sufi mystic, and Dr. Posner's great teacher, right, who was in the space, they see the unity. They see the unity of religions. When you go into the space, you realize that whether you say Allah or Om or Shunyata, Yahweh, that it's one ultimate truth. That's been said over and over for centuries, that there's one fundamental truth. But when you're here, and you're using the different languages, and you're stuck in your lens, right, then war breaks out across. Which is the real truth? Is Jesus the only way? Should I stop being a Jew and become a Christian because Jesus is my Savior and the only way to do it? Do I have to give up my identity and shift and convert into another? Right? Is it that I must affirm Allah as the only true name or die? Right? So that in the box, when you put this truth down in here, terrible abuses and violence has continued all the way through history. And people start killing each other over their ideology. That's what ideology is. Ideology is a grammar of your culture. Literally, if you think ideology, the idea structure. So the communist ideology has shaped the whole modern world. When Karl Marx wrote his Communist Manifesto and saw that the individual, treating the individual first, and capitalism is one way that he saw as bourgeois society, and he wrote a new grammar, a playbook for a communist ideal society, where the commune is first, not the individual, right? And the state rules. That led to a shift of the planet in the birth of communism as a way of life. That created tremendous violence, right? And is still playing out today. I'm just trying to show you how ideas rule, right? Do you get that point? Because all of these teachers are saying one fundamental axiom. There's a science here. That's what I'm leading up to now. I'm about to say it, okay? Although these are very different vocabularies, so when you hear Buddha speaking about getting out of the box and going into shunyata and experiencing connectivity, or let me just go back up a moment to the Bhagavad Gita to give you that example. If you read the Bhagavad Gita, it is a dialogue between Krishna, who is the voice of Om, Brahman, the grammar here, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. Brahma is the creator, Vishnu is the preserver, Shiva is the one who brings time and change and therefore destruction and death and transformation. Vishnu holds steady, is a conservation, steadiness, right? That's Vishnu. Brahma is the creator, Vishnu is the preserver, Shiva is the one who brings change and therefore destruction. He's not a destroyer in the negative sense, but process. And Krishna is the birth of Vishnu into the world. So Krishna shows up and Arjuna is on the battlefield. That's how the dialogue begins. It's an incredible dialogue. So Arjuna, I'll give you an example because again it's quite apropos and it'll help us advance very quickly into this. So Arjuna, the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita begins with Arjuna on the battlefield just about to enter the war. And he's a war hero, and he's with his brothers, and it's a family that's divided. His cousin has grabbed the throne, and he believes it should go to him according to the stipulation. So he His cousin refuses to hand over the throne for rightful rule, and there's a showdown between the family, right, for the right to rule. So Arjuna is on one side, and he's ready to charge in. The trumpets are blowing, the conch shells are going, the banners are waving. He's holding his great trophy, his weapon, that is with a great war prize. He's a war hero, right? And he looks across the field and he sees his cousins, the kids he grew up with, his uncle, his teacher, and he's going to have to go kill them. And something pierces him, right? Here's Arjuna. He's the everyday person, the ego person, who knows what ethics is. He's a warrior, and he has to go to war, and that's his ethic. He's living this playbook. But suddenly on the battlefield, when he sees a split in his own family, and he's got to go kill his own people, something pierces him. And he says, this can't be right. It can't be right for me to kill my own people. So he gets second thoughts at that moment. And his charioteer is Krishna, as it turns out. Very convenient, right? Krishna is charioteer, and Arjuna is behind him. And says, but he turns to Krishna and says, Krishna, I can't kill my own people. This is not right. If I go and kill them, I couldn't live with myself. And I know if I drop my weapon now, I'm committing suicide because I'm dishonored. And I might as well just go die. So I'm in a lose-lose situation, Krishna. There's no way out for me. Either I die by going and killing my own people, I couldn't live with myself, or I drop my weapon and I commit suicide by dishonoring myself. Krishna, help me. Right? And that's chapter 1. That's where it begins. Right? What is that story? It's the ego person realizing that the life is the ID is such a crisis that everything that she has learned to that point is broken on them, and meaning goes out. The lights go out. They're facing absurdity. Remember, meaning is making sense, right? And when you realize that your everyday life story, your worldview, ain't working, and it's collapsing on you, on the battlefield of life, you turn to the higher voice, please help me at this point. That's the beginning of wisdom. That's the beginning of the Gita. So Krishna understands what's going on. Krishna is here. The high voice, the Om voice, the awakened consciousness, the high self, right? Talking to the ego divided, broken self that's fallen apart. Literally collapsed on the battlefield. He's sick. His being has collapsed on him. And the dialogue begins, and it goes on. And I'm just going to quickly say that what Krishna does as a physician, a healer, is to help Arjuna understand. Arjuna, to make this move, say, do you realize that you are egoing? That everything in your world has been these concepts, everything you've been doing, being and becoming, and all of these words that you've been using, do you realize you're in the ego language? Have you ever thought of that? Of course he hasn't. So the second chapter, Krishna gives him a crash course in ego logic. And he says that, do you realize that if you are being, you're saying you're not going to enter the battle because you don't want to kill your own people. Can you kill a soul? You can't kill a soul. He says to Arjuna. That's ignorant, because being can't be destroyed. So if you understood your own logic of being, you can't kill a being. And many philosophers have seen that. So Socrates, when he's about to drink the hemlock, said the soul can't be killed. The soul is eternal being. The body can be destroyed. It's a category mistake to say the soul dies. It's nonsense to say I die when you mean I, the soul. It's a category mistake. Right? That's Socrates' wisdom. And that's the wisdom that the first stage of wisdom is there's wisdom in the box. Right? So Krishna teaches Arjuna very quickly that if it's being, if this is the lens you're using, why are you worried about killing? You can't kill another soul. Go on with the battle. I said, even if you're becoming, and everything is becoming, and everything is process and change, then what will be, and what is born will die. And you can't stop that, Arjuna. So if this is the reality of becoming, then you might as well do the battle, because they're going to die anyway. Pick up your weapon and fight. So what Krishna is doing is teasing him to get a knowledge of the place of the ego language quickly as a prerequisite to then say, okay, and now chapter 3. Enough of that. Let's now do yoga. And if you want to break out of the cycle of samsara and trapped and to become a liberated being, are you ready for this, Arjuna? All right, I will now teach you yoga. And what is yoga? Yoga is a science of breaking the hold of the ego self and moving step by step into integrity of Om. of the unified space of Brahman, to realize a high self. And there are many yogas, there are many ways to do it. Right? And chapter after chapter, Krishna is teaching Arjuna the yoga of action, the yoga of philosophy, concept, wisdom, the yoga of devotion, right? Bhakti yoga, karma yoga, doing. If you're a doer in the world, I'll show you how through doing you will liberate yourself. And the way you do it, Arjuna, is everything you do from now on. From now on. Don't you do it from the ego. Let the ego go. Every act you perform from now on, orient it this way. Which means what? You're almost going to have to do what Abraham does. You have to sacrifice the I. You've got to let it go. Every act. From now on, that's what yoga is. Yoga is quieting the ego voice and entering into, rehabilitating the self to go into that space of Om. And what is Om? Om is the infinite unified force that holds all things together. The God space, whatever you want to call it, right? What you get, some remarkable, that the Hindu view is saying that reality is a profoundly unified, integral, interconnected space. Buddha is saying it's all empty, none of this applies here, everything is interconnected. The Tao, there's an infinite force, and the chi energy flows through all things as a unity, right? And when your chi energy gets broken and divided, you get sick. So what is the high medicine of chi? Is to get your mind and body into integrity, because this keeps dividing and breaking everything down. That's really what I'm trying to show. All of these traditions saw that. And so my work has been to realize, as a logician, my question for 40 years has been, how do you get these different worldviews? And I'm not going to go into that in any detail. I'm going to give you some hints of that, because I want to show you that different worlds can present the human being very differently. That I'm going to show you some worlds in which the mind and the body are severed. Physical reality is one lens, and if you take that as primary, it does something to your psyche. The mind consciousness is another one. If you take that primary, it depreciates the body. And it's extremely difficult in the box to get a unity of mind-body. And if integral medicine is experiencing the unity of mind-body-spirit, the point is, if you're using the technology that keeps breaking these apart, you're going to be in a broken, fragmented situation. So the prescription we're hearing across the board is, if you can get out of the ego technology of using this program of your mind and consciousness that divides and separates and breaks into pieces and can move into this space, there's profound connectivity and healing and integrity and unity that takes place. So the pathway, the universal, the global wisdom of the ages has distilled some fundamental medical prescription and diagnosis. That if you are egoing and processing yourself in this way, you're inevitably going to break and divide and be in a violent situation. And to the extent that our cultures are dominated by this way of ego thinking and living and culture making, it's going to be in fragmentation, war, and violence. Failure of communication, 9/11s, Rwandas, Holocausts, breakdown of relations, divorces, breakup of families, eating disorders. All of this is traceable to consciousness and how you're using it, right? So I want to show that, where do you learn in medical school? Where's the medical training of you've got to understand the way you're processing your reality and making yourself. And if you're incompetent and you're doing this improperly, you can deform yourself. And if you deform yourself, you're not going to be well, right? This is not usually on the map for medical training, right? So this is really what I'm saying. There's a missing foundation for integral healing. What I'm trying to say is that if there's a way somehow to understand the language that's going on here, and that way of using our minds, apparently that is the key to mind and healing. That's where you find the connectivity. And if human beings together can find that space, if all of our worlds are coming out of this place, here, no matter what they are, and they're all meeting in a common ground, an origin, if this is true, however many worlds there are, and perspectives, and disciplines, if these geniuses are correct, that there's a profound unifying force that's infinitely unifying, that's the origin of reality, and it implies a unified field of interconnectivity where everything is connected within it, and nothing can stand outside of it, then all of our worlds, all our vocabularies, all of our disciplines, all of our perspectives have a common origin and source. And that has been known. But here's what's been missing. The first step in my journey was to see that you could decode these different worlds. They have a different shape. I'll talk about that in a moment. I'm more interested in what's going on here at the moment. And as a philosopher and logician, ontologist and logician, the one question I was asking all through my career is there a fundamental logic where worlds meet? The logics I studied here in my early work when I was at Brandeis, you get different, there are the laws of thought that you get in the box. What I found, in fact, when I arrived at Haverford in my PhD dissertation, I was studying the classical logic of Aristotle that shaped European consciousness for over 2,000 years, and the modern mathematical logic introduced by Frege, Russell, Wittgenstein, and the modern logicians that rejected that logic. I studied that logic. And what I saw is that there were two lenses. They had very different logics that repelled each other. And I couldn't find a way to resolve them. They were incompatible. That's where I started. That logic is polarized and split and irreconcilable. Logic is in a contradiction. Imagine that crisis. That may leave you cold, but I was up worrying at night about that, because if logic is split and logic is the science of reason, then reason is split, and if reason is split and it's contradictory, if it's contradictory, then there's no truth. There's no coherence. And the long dream of there being an integral coherence is over. We just have fragments. That's what it meant. So when I arrived at Haverford in 1968, this was my finding: logic is split. And it's in 1971, after 3 years of teaching, and I was in despair because I couldn't find a way to find the common ground and a universal fundamental logic. That's been the dream of philosophy always. Is there a unified fundamental logic of consciousness? That was the question I was asking. And how do we connect our worlds? And can we communicate across worldviews? Those two questions. The two aspects of the same question. Because if there is a fundamental logic, a common ground, then that would answer the question how we can connect across worlds, right? So when I went to India for the first time in 71, trying to just take a break from my crisis, and I went to India to study sitar and tabla and Sanskrit, and then lecture on my logic, I didn't realize that the philosophy would open up a new lens. But when I started reading the Vedas and started reading Buddhist thought, and for the first time really, because I grew up in the West, I began to see that, wow, these teachers saw that I didn't even realize, because I was in this box. I wasn't even here. I didn't realize, oh, I have a lens and I was egoing. I didn't even have a name for ego thinking. I was just thinking. And when I realized that Krishna, when I read the Gita, was saying, Arjuna, you're egoing. Don't you realize that? You're using a technology of thinking. It's low grade. It fragments. It's a low level of processing information. All the information is put into boxes and pieces. Space is one, time is another, cause is another. All of these pieces of information are separated off, and I am separated off. I didn't even realize that. Now, when I saw the Buddhist thinking, that Buddha diagnosis, and it's going to be split and fragmented, then I realized that was what I discovered. I discovered an ultimate split in the ego lens, in ego consciousness. And that there's a way to actually deal with that. So my new agenda in 1971, when I returned to Haverford and began a whole new stage of my life, is could there be a unified logic in this space? Because that's what, this is non-dual, this is dual. They saw this is dualistic. It's always going to fragment and separate. And this is non-dual. So the question I asked over 30 years ago is there a fundamental logic here in which our worlds connect? And just to go fast forward now, I'm almost ready to put it all together, okay? And give you what I announced at the beginning. I began to see, as I studied these different traditions across borders, I was able to step out of looking in this space where you got these divided worlds. This is where my colleagues were. When they were doing multicultural studies or cross-cultural studies, they were in this place looking at one lens, looking at the other. I started teaching there. When I came back, I gave a course in Hindu philosophy. And what was that? I started saying, well, who is Krishna? Who is Arjuna? What are they doing? And I was teaching in the ego box. And after the first year, I realized that's ridiculous, because the whole teaching is, the essence of the text is to realize you're in the box, that the box is deadly in some profound sense, and that you need to come out of the box into the space of awakened consciousness. So I was stunned as a teacher. I realized I can't be teaching in the box, a teaching that questions the box and requires the reader, the student, to experience this integral awareness in a direct way. How do I recreate teaching to do that? And that's really what I had to reinvent, teaching out of the box. I won't go into that now, but the point I'm making is that when you step back from being in the box, incredible things happen and open up. And as I looked into these different traditions and worldviews, African thought, indigenous Native American thought, and they're all suggesting there's an integral fundamental field. And so I began to see that there is a logos. This is my hypothesis, that whatever name you use for the infinite word, and all of these cultures, including science, when it says energy is the ultimate source of all the universe, that's like energy is like pointing to the fundamental field. That the fundamental field of the many names, I use the word logos from the Greek, right? Whether you call it Tao, Om, Allah, Yahweh, energy, whatever name, nature, whatever name you use for the ultimate, it's going to have a logic to it. And that's what I began to open up, the logic of logos, the logic of the unified field. And I saw that language here is fundamentally unified and interconnected, and language here is fundamentally divided and separated, all of our vocabulary. And so I began to, this is what I began to develop that helped accelerate the process. I said, we better figure out when we're in the ego box and speaking, whether I'm speaking as a Hindu, a Buddhist, a Jew, a Christian, a secular, non-believer, atheist, whatever it is. When I'm in the box, any word I say, I'm going to mark with single brackets, just to remind me I'm ego languaging. And when I'm here in this language, I use this marker, the logos sign, to say I'm speaking the logos grammar now, the Om language, the Tao language, the Shunyata language, the Allah, the Yahweh. When the logos, the infinite word, is speaking, the infinite grammar, if I'm going to read scripture, and we say the word of God, and if God is the infinite word, then the language of God can't be processed in the single bracket space. I call this a single bracket, and this is a double bracket. And that's a device. It started out as a teaching device, but it became much more. As a teaching device, it was saying, okay, students, work with me now, because Krishna is speaking this grammar, and Arjuna is speaking this grammar. And the journey of the text, if you want to really rigorously study it, is how does that voice speak to this voice, and lead this voice step by step to enter into that space. So that the I, the Arjuna, the self, and the I of the awakened self are two profoundly different I's. And the one who's speaking the logos language and logic of integral, non-separating continuum, every word in this field. Remember, the double brackets indicates this field of logos. And that's a very profound point, because every word in this space, any word you utter, is going to have a logic of connectivity with every other word. Whereas words here are profoundly separated. That's the whole point. When you have your ID, you are different from the others. Identity and difference. When I get my ID, think about it. If I say, who are you? Tell me about what makes you unique. You'll give me all of the properties and predicates of your story that make you absolutely unique and separate, and therefore it differentiates you from every other being. So the logic of identity is the logic of difference, so that you get identity by displacing. So it's exclusion. That's the point. So that this picture I've drawn here is a very important one. When I draw this line and go from the integral space into this space, that's a profound shift. And when I do this and put it in the box, and then put myself over, here's another line. Here's I, and here's not I. The I of my ego identity is the thinking subject, and everything that appears in my world is an object. So the subject is entertaining an object, and the object is a screen objectified. And then when I process the object, I process it in terms of the subjects and the predicates. Socrates is wise. Haverford is a Quaker institution. I'm an undergraduate, whatever it is, you process it here. But think about what we're doing. Because the logic here, every word here, is going to be different from it's going to have a definition. A definition gives it its ID and separates it off from everything else. So then what you have is like you have space. Is profoundly different from time. Those are separated. Mind is profoundly different from body. 2 dimensions. Consciousness is not visible. The body is visible. So if I make it up of mind and body, then there are 2 different fundamental fields that are making me up. And my mind and my body are separate in some profound sense. So each of these become a separate piece. And so on. And here's another big problem. If the subject is independent of the predicate, if this is the primary being, here's a mystery that was never solved. That shows the emptiness of what's going on in this box. Right? That's what these thinkers say. There's a trick that goes on here that leads you to believe that it's working, but it's not working. It can't work on its own terms. That's what they all show. It falls apart. If you really step back and break the grip it has on your mind, then you'll see that it's really flimsy. It's not based upon anything, because if you strip from the subject all the information in the predicate, what is a predicate? That's the properties. Perform this experiment with me. Take all of your properties and put them over here where they belong. Your color, your shape, your size, your location in space and time, all of that stuff. Strip it away. What do you get? Okay, I'm not an S now, I'm just an X. I'm an empty. Nothing. I'm an X. That's existentialism, by the way. Existentialism is saying you're a nothing. If you take away all of this information and all of this essence of stuff, then you'll find you're a nothing. That's what you really are at the core. But then what is holding this X? There's not even anything holding the X. Because if it has no space or time or connectivity or continuity, there is none. So wipe it out. So all there are these names: space, time, color, figure. What am I made up of? Color, figure, space, all of these attributes. And they're all separate pieces. So I'm all in pieces. There is no fundamental thing that's there or substance that's holding these attributes together. That's an incredible disclosure if you find out that that's an empty situation. That's been one of the problems about individual identity. Okay? So here's the point. I began to realize, as I learned these different grammars across the tradition, all of these scriptures, and it really opened my eyes on the West too, because I realized that before I was reading, I was raised in the Christian tradition as well. I was both the Hindu and the Christian background growing up in the West Indies and in New York City. I went to churches. I learned the Bible. I got prizes for memorizing the 10 Commandments. All this was part of my background. But I knew about Jesus and God and all of that. Right? And one of my brothers was telling me Jesus is the only way. He became converted to Christianity and was a believer, and saying that Jesus is the only truth. Right? And I'm now discovering these different points. Well, what happened was, once I began to learn this grammar, and I realized that the Word of God can't be put down here, but it has to be understood in this grammar, it opened a whole new chapter for me to look back at the Judaic tradition and the Christian tradition. I began to see that Jesus, for example, was precisely making this move. For Christians, when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, he was speaking the Logos language. He wasn't speaking ego language. He was saying that if you speak ego language, you're going to be writing the law in stone. You're not going to be living it in your heart. If you're going to live it, you've got to be it. And when you cross into this logosphere, into the logos space, then you live the law. You're one with the law. You're one with the Father. I and the Father are one. When he said that, that was a simple axiom of this logic. Because to be in this space is to be interconnected with the field. That I've explained how language here is always separate. The thinker and what we say and what it pictures is all separated. But when you cross into this deep space, that separation comes to one PowerPoint. And if you could see that, everything shifts. You'll see the power of this language, right? And I'm going to do it with a few examples, with Jesus, with Moses, with Descartes, and with us, right? Because, for example, students say, Professor Gangadine, if all of these wisdoms are speaking up there, and I have to somehow go from I and I'm over here, if I'm over here in the single brackets, how can I go there? It's so far away. And the more I do, I want to be wise. I'm striving for wisdom. I want wisdom. But the more I strive for my ego, the more I'm more entrenched in ego. They're right. All of the traditions saw the paradox. How can the ego person let go of the ego and come into wisdom, which seems so far away and removed? Right? I'm now going to make it very easy, okay? Because this is the picture I used for teaching for almost a decade, and the pressure kept building up with these questions, and I realized there's a simple way to answer this, that the logos surrounds the entire field. We are all living in the double brackets all the time. The logos is infinite. All of our egoing, all of our ego life is playing off of the resources of the logos. So when I did this and said the logos is the infinite field, I hope you follow the logic. If reality is an infinite force or field, whatever name you give, it's got to be one. Elementary. It's a no-brainer. Why? Because if it were two, there would be an other delimiting it, and it wouldn't be infinite. So the infinite can't be limited by an other bounding it. It is boundless. And if it's infinite, it's infinitely unifying. What does that mean? It can't break. It's infinite. Every piece of it is infinite. That's an infinite calculus. So what does that mean? It means it's infinitely unifying. Nothing can step outside of its jurisdiction. It holds everything together. What does that mean? Everything is interconnected. Profoundly. Nothing can step outside of the infinite force. So what does that mean? Is everything one? Does everything get crunched on? No. Everything isn't one. Because the infinite force is so infinite in its largesse, it opens up infinite possibilities. So there are infinite possibilities of being. It's an infinite web of diversity, yet connected. That's called, in the Buddhist, Indra's net. Indra is a god. And Indra's net is an infinite, and you think of internet as intranet. Indra's net is an infinite network of infinite points, all the center, and each interconnected with every other point. That's the calculus. That's the Om field, that's a Tao field, that's a Yahweh field. If you could touch one moment of point of that, you become interconnected with the entire. So every point is a power point of the infinite. And you've got to say that if we're one of those points in that net, then we're carrying the code of the infinite. That's why we say there's that of God in every person. Or the kingdom of God is within. Or we're created in the image of God. Right? The image of Logos. We carry the seed of Logos. We have the DNA of Logos. However you want to say it. Every point is a power point connected with every other point. That's an incredible simple insight. If you just follow through the logic of that, we'll get down to a language. Because students ask, how can I go there? And I point out, do you realize if you had to write an image, if I gave you as an assignment, write a symbol, the simplest symbol that universally captures your situation. That would be the symbol of where you are. You've got a story or multiple stories that I spoke about of your IDs. But the path of liberation is stepping back from that, and you're already there. Your self is always with you. Your high self isn't far away. It's closer to you than your ego. You are your high self. But we're schooled in these separations in this box, in the multiple IDs. All of our education is drumming into us from day one the different ways to characterize and predicate and narrate yourself in this technology. And we don't gain literacy here. And when I spoke at the beginning of this presentation of the missing grammar, the missing integral space of healing that's missing for science, for culture, for integral medicine, I'm pointing to this technology that we've been illiterate in. So when students ask me, Professor Gangadine, how do I go from here to there? I point out that there are many moments in our life. The ego is not that tough, right? The ego, this single bracket may be deadly, but it isn't as powerful as this. So this force of your high self is constantly working, consciously and unconsciously, on the ego stories. So when you go to sleep and you're putting down your guard, and that deeper field opens up spontaneously in your dream world, you begin to morph and meld in a very different way. And you have sometimes you're flying, right? Sometimes you're way back as you're a child, but you're living in the present dorm, and your strange space and time morphs in all sorts of, in this dream space. And sometimes I use this example. Imagine a Bryn Mawr student, a Swarthmore student, running. She's a runner. And she's on the track team, and she's practicing long-distance running, and she's running, and the coaches keep coaching her how to run. And she's processing the information this way, to breathe and lean and lift up your knees, open up your stride, and teaching her all of the different dynamics of running and the art of being a good runner. And she's out there on nature trail running and running and running 2-3 years. And one year in the fall, something happens, right? She's out there running, and suddenly she is just running. What does that mean? It's not I am running. Is that running is taking place. A profound unified experience of being in the flow, of being zen, being in the moment. She is just the running. It's not even my body is running or I am running. Running is taking place. That's double bracket running. It's so profound, it's such a deeper level, you can't break down the information into that. That doesn't get to it. That's just an integral moment of experiencing running. You are the running. And this has been seen many times. So, you know, when you're jamming with your friends in music, and suddenly you realize, wow, that was great. We lost ourselves in the music. We were just the jazz, or we were just the dance, or we were just the soccer game. You know, when athletes go in the zone. And it's well known, books are written about being in the zone. What's that? It's when you together break out of your separate wills and egos and separation, and you click as one, right? So that right wing, which just chips the ball to the center, and the forward is already in the air to meet it. And the goalie anticipates and is already launching to anticipate it. And the forward just chips the ball with her head and puts a spin on it, and it just leaps out of the reach of the goalie. You know, that kind of ballet, you can't plan, you can't ego. You have to go into a higher space to pull off that kind of play when you're slam dunking the basketball with every shot and so forth. Those are moments. I mean, so it's right here. The high place is right here all the time. And the journey of wisdom is the shortest distance you can go from yourself to yourself. It is letting that drop, having the courage to step back from the stories that we've just been growing up with and the tapes we've been running about ourselves. And all of these traditions are saying that. So Abraham and Isaac, Abraham had to somehow touch this self in faith. That's faith. Faith is knowing who you are. This is faith. Faith is not a belief. Most people don't understand the power of faith. So when you say when Jesus said your faith is healed, right? Pick up your crutch and walk, right? What does that mean? It's not, faith is not single bracket and then belief. You know, so you have two kinds of belief. You believe I have faith that Jesus saves, and the faith and that smoking causes cancer. So I have scientific evidence for my scientific belief, based upon evidence of this belief, and then I have another belief, Jesus is my Savior, and I have believed that on faith, and that's it completely misses the point. Faith, in this view, is the awareness of this deeper rationality. It's connectivity. That's why it heals. Faith can heal. So you want faith healing, or you want consciousness healing the body? Right? I'm trying to say, if you could touch this power of mind, it has tremendous medical force. It's medicinal. And the question is, how do you do that? You see, I'm almost there now to wrap this up. I'm going to stop to take your questions. Okay, you've been very patient. You could see why it took me a while to say this, but now I'm just going to give you a few more examples of this and stop. And point out why this technology and literacy here is so important. I've been suggesting in non-dual language that words here are divided, but words up here are connected. So when Logos in the Bible, when God speaks the universe forward, what is it? What happens? If in the beginning is the infinite word, and the infinite word speaks, let there be light. Imagine, in this language, where the infinite word just thinks, let there be light, the Big Bang opens up. Because there's no separation from the word and being. The word is not describing being, the word is being. So when the double bracket word is extremely powerful. And Descartes got this. I'll give you an example with Descartes. Excuse me. When Descartes, if you've heard the philosopher who said, I am, I exist, as an ultimate truth, most people say he said, I am, I exist, I think, therefore I am. I completely botch it. Because Descartes in his first experiment showed that there's nothing in his world, in his training, that he could trust as true. Because truth is always pointing to a fact beyond itself. And he could always be mistaken. And he's separated from his truths. So every belief, 2 + 2 = 4, he says, well, even in my dream, that must be true. But he says, what if there's a demon deceiving me to make me believe? I accept it. So he was seeing the dual space between the thinker and the thought, left room for doubt and distortion. And the demon of deception can always deceive you because you're separated. So he dropped his mind, he dropped his body, all of the truth he was raised in, he wiped the board clean. He says, I'm not going there again. Because the demon is control. The demon of doubt is ruling there. So at this point I have no truth that I can rely on ultimately. And then the light bulb went up and says, I am. It was a shock when he said that. I am. He had no predications, he had no ID, he had no subject, no predicates, none of that. When he said, I am. That's like the runner at that moment. When Descartes said, I am, he was his speech. He was that thought. He is the thought. He is the very thought, I am. He wasn't thinking about I am referring to some object different from the I as a pronoun referring. He was performing himself. I am. He wasn't describing himself. You see what I mean? He wasn't referring to himself. He was selfing. He was in the zone. I am. He says, what am I? I have no idea. He was out of the box. He says, what am I? I don't know. But that I am is sure. I've hit the ultimate truth. Let me see what I can do. And immediately he begins, oh my God, if I stop thinking, I may stop being. So he discovered 3 powerful formulas immediately. That I equals thinking, equals being, equals time. And that one moment, I am, I think. How long? As long as I think it. He saw every moment. And then he said, oh my God, if I'm just so precarious that I may cease to be, if I cease to think, I'm finite. I'm not self-contained. I'm dependent. What am I dependent on? And very quickly he's God, the infinite. So the I am immediately led to the I thou. That was the unit. When he said I am and clarified it was I thou. The other, the infinite thou, was already present to him. And he proved that infinite being was Logos is real. If you reach the I am, you immediately know that infinite Logos is. It's not a proof here. That's how everyone has read Descartes and misread him, I think. Descartes was meditating. That's the name of his book. His name is Meditations on First Philosophy. First philosophy is the classic attempt to get to what is first. And he meditated his way out of the box and entered the meditative voice and discovered the I am. When he stripped away all of that. That was the start of the culture. Right? And you have many examples of this here. If you read the Bible, when Moses is speaking to God at the burning bush, and God is giving him the law and saying, go back, and he says, whom shall I say sent me? I am that I am. That's my name. Right? What does God say to Moses? I am that I am. Well, I mean, if you say, I am that I, if you write it out here in ego language, you completely blow it. You can't do that. I am that I am is the infinite word speaking to in the dialogue, in this I thou. The infinite thou is speaking directly. And what's the name? I am. So whether it's Jesus saying, I am the way, I am the way, the truth, and the life, which is exactly what required of this kind of space. So in a way, Jesus was trying to model the double bracket language, when it's a new covenant, right? Everything Jesus did was trying to say, go from here to there. That's a crossing, because we've been separated. So this is the sin line. I don't mean it in the bad sense. Sin is a condition of separation from integrity. And as long as you sin, you're in the cave of ignorance. And when you're here, you can't do it by yourself. You need a higher force to pull you. And that's the bridge. So that in a way, the bridge from here to there. And so for Christians, the Christ is the bridge that links the separation back. So the fall of Adam and Eve was a fall from integrity into disintegrity, right? So whatever, you don't have to put it in negative language. Sin is separation, ontological. And eternal life, if you want eternal life, you go back into that. And all of these teachers are saying that. If you read Buddha, the first lines of Buddha's teaching is that if you think this way, you're dead. If you think this way, immortality, life. Or Jesus, the wage of sin is death, and the gift of God is eternal life. So this is life. And this life is suffocating. It's cut off. It's strangling. It's a death zone. They all say the same thing. The consequence, the scientific consequence of severance and separation is being in the cave and out of the light and crossing into this. Notice what that, if you could experience that, you can't die. Because death is one of those artifacts of ego language that we live in dread of. Death. Every concept we have in ego box is under suspicion. And if you could deconstruct death and experience life, right, then you're experiencing your wovenness into the entire field. So now if you're doing astronomy in this infinite field and you're looking at the light coming from galaxies billions of light years away, just arriving in our visual field, and we have spectroscopy and we can look and refract that light and get the information out of it, right? Say, wow, that star doesn't even exist anymore, but there it is. There's light showing through. That's the way we are. We're reverberating through the entire field. That's why we say Jesus lives now, or Gandhi is alive now. Gandhi's influence is resonating all through that field right now. So the point is that if we are that point, and we are separated off in this way, then one of the key ingredients in moving into the healing place, to become a whole being, an integral being that's connected, and here's my last points I'll make before I stop for questions. Every point here, like time, if you understood ego time and why it's deadly and stressful, because ego time has its past, its present, and its future, and it's broken into pieces. So we say, forget the past right now. You want to live, live now, right? You're at Swarthmore right now, and your past, you had all these things happen to you, and you're abused, and it's keeping you, it's crippling me. And you know what, I'm so anxiety-ridden about my future, and getting into medical school, and going into law school, and getting the grades. It's shutting me down. I'm going to forget the future, forget the past, I'm going to live now. Let's party. Right? So let's get wasted. Right? And you want to party now, because see, this is a, but that's because there is no now. There is no moment that's now. But if you could go into integral time, imagine what that is. Same thing. If you try this experiment, it's a miracle. You could take anything that's in this box, like a piece of chalk. It's just a piece of dust. It's a piece of chalk. What would it be like if I put the chalk here? What information does it have? What does it say to me in the logosphere rather than the egosphere? Do an experiment. You're on Mars, and you find this. If you find a mosquito on Mars, what that would mean? You know, oh, it's a mosquito, right? Or a drop of water. You find chalk. You say, oh my God! And you see this on Mars. It says civilization, writing, language, intelligence. Yeah, it'll start to speak volumes. It'll tell the whole story of culture. A little piece of chalk. Now you're tapping its deeper code, its information. Let me talk real information. This is science we're talking about, right? You, the I, encodes the entire universe. I mean, if you can understand what goes into a human being in our bodies, it's a miracle. If you understood the information, the science of decoding. So to enter into this moment, the power now time, that tense we have forgotten. We never knew. The presence tense, not the present tense, presence. If you could enter the now, what is that like in time? Well, every moment is meeting. Past, present, and future are showing up right now. Your entire history is right now. Your entire future is right now. So if you can now, right now at Swarthmore, and live and learn right now, medical school will be handled. If you're really in the zone right now, in your learning, as a liberal arts student, and learning for learning's sake, truly learning, and all of your mind and body is opened up and your senses, because here you're completely shut down. You can't feel your body. You can't see with your eyes. You can't feel. You can't taste. The ego self, the body, my body is very shut. My mind is blocked by minding this way. My body is shut down. I can't sense. So imagine if I could be in this place where my mind and my body and are all one. That's what Zen is, for example. You can breathe. You can taste. You can feel. You're alive. You have a different body. If you could levitate your body into this space, right? This is martial arts now, right? For example, this is yoga. Well, why do yogis have this great, they can even regulate their heartbeat, right? They do the impossible things because you're not supposed to do that. That's autonomic. Now, how can you do that? Yogis, I change the temperature of my body just by my consciousness. They can do weird things, right? Because they have a different body. It's not the same body. It's not the same mind. If you can enter into it. That was the whole point. So what Jesus was teaching at the Last Supper, he says, I'm going to go now and I'm going to give you one covenant. Do it from now on. Whenever you eat, whatever you eat, when you eat bread, it is my body. It's the body of Logos. Whatever you eat from now, eat here. Be a Logosarian. Whatever you eat, don't ego eat. From now on, eat in remembrance of who you are. Remember me. And whenever you drink the wine, this is my blood. The blood of Logos, of life. So you want to go on a diet? And you want to eat right? You can't ego eat. Whatever you eat, don't eat this kind of reified food. Right? This is not a proper diet. So you could diet. The ego can do all of these things in the culture. The billions of dollars that are going into ego. I do my yoga, I have my spa, I go to my health club, I'm on a diet, I'm eating whole foods, right? But if you're ego eating, you're missing the point. Organic is here. Nature is here. Natural healing. To go natural is to go into nature, go into the unified field, go into how do you cross there? There are boundless ways to do it. Through sound, music, play, meditation, massage, martial arts, you name it. There are many ways to go from here into the whole body of healing. So to sum up, if you follow what I've been saying, we've been really incompetent and illiterate in the grammar of Logos, despite the great teachers for centuries and millennia teaching us this way of speech. We have been stuck in the box using speech here and taking this information down and killing each other. And if you look at the state of the world, and the wars, and the violence, and the discommunication, and the divorce, and the failure to connect, failure to love, how can people love here? Because if I'm here and I'm loving you, and I love you with all my heart, right? And I say to my woman friend or my significant other, you're the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I write my Valentine card. Right, that's an insult. So you're the greatest thing that ever happened to me. There it is. You're an object, right? Rather than this space of I, thou. Imagine what it would be like to go into the love zone, where I and the other, the thou, are so in communion. You're other, and I can never reduce you to an object. But we stand in an open space, right? To cross into this space is to open your lens so that you could see what's before you, to show up as it is without distorting it. The question I raised at the beginning of this conversation, that what would it take to step back from privileging your lens to go into a space where your mind is open and you could see, as a scientist, the work of art, the other person, nature, whatever it is, right? These eyes are very different than those eyes. So when Krishna says to Arjuna, you're ready now, you've been prepared, I'll open your third eye, right? That's the third, now you can see. When Jesus heals the blind, he was doing a metaphor. I'm here to make the blind to see. Or when he spoke and people didn't get it, he said, for those who have ears, let them hear. Right? They don't have the ears to listen to the words. They misappropriate it. And then we kill each other in the name of Jesus. And so it's tragic. What I'm trying to say is, being stuck in a box is a matter of our undoing. And so the bottom line now, in terms of the healing point, I started with integral healing. I'm suggesting that the missing grammar and science of logos, as I would put it, the technology of this is where all of our diverse worlds come. And all of the healing modalities, including scientific, science is a great art of healing. Medical science is good. But when you take it exclusively and you do it here, it is part of the problem. So if integral healing, becoming an integral whole being, is going into this unified integrity of holism, of becoming a whole integral person, then all of the healing modalities done correctly will lead to a deeper healing. If you could do aromatherapy, if you could do yoga of sound, vibration healing, resonance and healing. Because when you can listen to this deeper sound, that heals you. Om is a sound. And when you meditate on Om, truly, it takes you out of the ego into this Om space. Whatever resonates here pulls you into that field. And then you find the connectivity and integrity. And that's the space of love. So love heals. What is love? Love is the actual fabric of reality. It's the interconnectivity of every point. So when you say God is love, or Logos is love, that axiom is correct, literally. Because what is love? Love is not a feeling. And being in love is not something the ego can do. When you fall in love, you're actually rising in love. Right? If you have a high moment, like that runner, where he says, I'm in love, and I don't care, I'm madly in love, right? You're so out of your mind. You're literally, I'm out of my mind. When you're swacked on the other person, you're connecting in a deep communion with the other in a real love. This is the love zone here. This is the object zone, where the other person is an object, and you're blocked in your intimacy issues and defenses and insecurities and so forth. Eating disorders happen because of the ego. All of the bulimia, and anorexia. All of these kinds of, obesity. Well, you can't stop eating because you're trying to fill the void. Eating disorders are part of the ego condition, and this has not been properly diagnosed by medical science. And I think if Dr. Posner, in pointing out some of the things that kill us, I would add, if he hasn't yet, that the primary cause of death is ego. Because the ego is what generates the concept of death. And by living the ego life, you're living a death. So ego is a form of suicide. Slow suicide. Rather than being life. And so medical science, of whichever medical science, when you do acupuncture, it's not ego puncture. When you do yoga, it's not ego yoga. You can't do yoga here. Right? Yoga is essentially the second sutra or axiom of Patanjali, the great scientist who founded yoga science. Yogas chitam vritti nirodha is the way Sanskrit. Yoga is the quieting of the ego. Yoga is the quieting of the ego. So that is quieting of the ego. That's it. That says so. Yoga is so that union can happen with yourself and with the entire field. Then healing takes place. So this is ontological healing. And the pathway into ontological healing is awakening the mind, opening the lens. And that's the link between consciousness, wisdom, and the healing arts. And it's in this place that our diverse worlds connect. And that's where you get integral medicine and integral healing. So that's the story I wanted to tell. You've been very patient to go the distance with me. And we did have a little break, but we have time now for some questions. So the floor is open to your questions.
So what's going to happen to the teaching at these colleges?
Could you pull the lens back, please, so we can get, speaking of the lens, pull the zoom back so we can have some of the audience here. Say your question again, please.
What's going to happen to the teaching in the colleges that are all from that place?
That's exactly what my own.
Where is our learning going
That's
to come?
exactly, and that's
All
why
over the world.
that's why this seminar is here, first of all. And you remember, it's not for credit, because if you have to go through the route to get it for credit, you've got to go through all of the different loops that's going to say, no, there's a filter you have to go through. And my feeling with Dr. Posner was so generous to say, when we met, Ashok, this is so important to bring this to students. So he volunteers his time, and we have the space for students who, for whatever reason draws you here, are coming to this moment to at least hear the possibilities, right? And then you can ask your question, oh my God, but you're right, this is a matter of life and death. I think we're abusing our children. I'm going to just say it. I have 5 children. 2 grown daughters, one is 43 and one is 41, and then another generation of children. One is, my daughter Ashley is 19, and Nathan is 22, and Devin is 24. And the second group, as I grew more, I raised them in this double bracket space. From the beginning, I tried to, the home culture was to hold the space, to protect them from being schooled to death by the culture. And I knew that when they'd go to school to learn, and my son would come home, he said, I took a test and I saw so many answers, Dad. And the teacher wanted me to get the right answer. What's the right answer? And I would say, when you're here, the multiple intelligence that's going on, when you see the many different perspectives. I had to help him and save him from saying, I want you to learn to play this game and be brilliant at it. I'm going to send you into the schools. So I've sent my children into the schools knowing, and they would come home feeling literally shut down from what was going on in the culture of the schools, being schooled into the almost like if they hear of foot binding in China, there's mind binding that goes on and getting the right answers and fitting. Now it's important. It's important to learn the language. It's important to get literacy. It's important to learn math. All of these things are important, but we never point out where we are and that So I think it's tragic because we're reproducing ourselves in the same cycle. That's samsara. We're reproducing our children, the next generation, and then we see that the wars and the violence and the divorce and the failure to love, the incompetence, we can't be a human being. We're ill. We're culturally and impersonally ill. And on top of that, we're trying to get medicine to solve it, but it's not going to solve it in the box. No amount of medicine, no amount of yoga, no amount of acupuncture in the box is going to solve the problem. So your question is well taken. How do you transform the cultural reproduction so that we could help our kids become fully human? Because all of these teachers were saying, in the box, the ego is a subhuman. You're not fully human. You're part human. It's a journey to becoming human. So wisdom is a pathway to becoming a whole being. That's when you mature. That's when you become a moral being. You can't be moral here. You can follow rules. You can follow the honor code. That's what Jesus was saying. But to be a moral being, you've got to feel the law. You've got to be one with the law, with the logos. And that's what he was trying to teach. When you're in this field, you are feeling the connectivity. That's why Jesus says, love your enemy as yourself. If you hear it down here, he says, no way. I hate that person. Right? But when you're here, you realize, oh, my enemy is me. I've been my worst enemy. And this other enemy, when he says, remove the beam from your own eye. Or without sin, cast the first stone. All of that stuff was here. He was trying to remind you, you've got beams in your eyes. Don't stone her to death. Take the beam out of your eyes so you can see. And when you do, you'll see your connectivity with your other. Right? And then you can never kill that other because it's, so that education is just not there. The tragic thing is, if you follow what I've been saying, all of these teachers, I claim to be Christian, I claim to be a Jew, we all have all these, I claim to be American, right? And yet, although we're claiming all of that, we're way out of sync. Think of America. America is a broken culture. Single bracket America. Land of the free and home of the brave, one nation under God. All of that talk. When we say we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all persons are created equal and are endowed with certain inalienable rights, all that talk, that's high talk. We don't, that's right, that's right. So we're in the cave, right? And so when Martin Luther King went to the mountaintop and he studied with Gandhi, who was living this technology of ahimsa, nonviolence, right? What is Gandhi? Gandhi is practicing, Gandhi understood. Satya. Sat is being. And that is truth. He found the same formula Jesus found. I am the truth. I am, Descartes, the truth. I am being. The I is being. When you realize that, that's satyagraha. That's Gandhi. Satya is truth, graha is force. So Gandhi was teaching satyagraha, how to tap sat, and bring it. So when Martin Luther King discovered that and practiced civil disobedience to change the civil space to one of love and compassion and ethics and equality, and said, I've been to the mountaintop, I've seen the other side, I may not get there with you, but we're going to get there. He's seeing America. What is America like? It's a civic space that's civilized, where different, diverse people, not just in the boxes, not African America, not Asian America, not in the box, just humans, each person showing up for who she is. You could be gay. You're a human, you're a person. So that's a civic space in which equals show up together in diversity and unity. One nation, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. That ideal is America. We haven't had the American Revolution, folks. Because when we crossed the pond and came over from Europe here, we brought this with us. And the first stage of revolution, of independence, was a form of independence. Yeah, first stage, important. But the real American Revolution is this one. Going from America, the broken, to America, the healed, where people can be free together in democracy and power to the people, right? So something has to happen on the planet. And I don't want to put pressure on your generation, but it's not sustainable much longer. I'm actually giving you good news. I started out giving you a lot of negative points, but I'm giving you a very optimistic point. When I did this, you should have all just burst into glee, because the infinite force is holding us at every moment. And however strong the ego zone is, it can't overpower that. So this is ruling. Logos rules. The love force is stronger than the ego force. So as divisive and separate as it may be, and dismal as it might look in the cave, there's hope. That's hope. You follow? So the reason for hope is the hope in reason. This is reason. Reason is a place of intelligence, connectivity, science. I hope you see that, right? The old technology, in this space, is the subject here, is trying to understand the object there. But when you go into the deeper epistemology, this is why they say this is the place of wisdom, is knowledge and science. The subject here is arising with the object. There you can do science. Because I say, now I can see it with an open lens, what's going on in nature. I can see what the causes are. So this is the place of knowledge. Because I'm not imposing my lens on the object. I had my Newton lens on nature, I missed it. Einstein comes along, shifts the lens. I can see it differently. Now new scientists say, there are black holes. The speed of light is not the ultimate velocity. There are superluminary velocities fast, and the universe is non-local. What's happening in one part of the universe is connected. They're beginning to get it. So they have to shift the lens to this lens for science. And that's scientific medicine. I'm making a very revolution. If scientific medicine, allopathic medicine, went the distance and questioned its lens, which is a very specific lens. Scientific medicine is a very distorted specific lens. Here's one, I'll give you one example, two lenses here. One of the great lenses is that spirit rules over matter. Another one is that matter rules over consciousness or spirit. That's the highest organization. This is the Bible. In the beginning is spirit. Let there be light, and nature comes out of this, and matter comes out of spirit. Spirit rules. That's called idealism. That's the Bible world. The materialist world says that in the beginning is matter and energy. And Big Bang happened, and then later consciousness came. So consciousness is a derivate coming out of matter. So if I'm using this lens for my science, notice what's going to happen. That's what I'm suggesting. Materialism is a particular arrangement that science, contemporary science, such as it's evolving, is using this one exclusively and completely rejecting any other. So it's fundamentalist. Ego science is fundamentalist. It has a lens, and it's a regime, and any other way of thinking is rejected and discredited. So any other alternative worldview of medicine, forget it. It's mumbo jumbo. Consciousness can't heal. Consciousness can make a difference, because if you're having consciousness illness and you have schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or ADD, we'll treat the brain, because the brain, the matter, the body is primary to consciousness. So treat the body with medication and you cure consciousness. Whereas the one that says consciousness, spirit, or consciousness is primary, in the beginning is the word, and matter and body comes out of spirit, this structure, I could go on, there's so much I didn't tell you, right? That the mind and consciousness here is totally different from consciousness here. So if this is the lens that allopathic medicine is using, it's highly restricted, it's fundamentalist. What would happen to science if it really goes global and opens up the global lens and became scientific and not fundamentalist? Fundamentalist means if you don't question your lens, you're being uncritical. If science had the courage to say, I have a particular lens amongst many other options, and this is the best lens, and my evidence is shown, that would be brave, but it doesn't do that. It simply assumes a lens, sees reality from the material point of view, treats the human being as matter, so consciousness is derivative. So if you medicate the body, you will cure the consciousness. Big disaster. And the revolution is to say, no, there are other ways to look at the human being as a conscious being, so that the body is part of consciousness, not consciousness is part of the body. That's a complete inversion. But both of these are distorted. It's not a matter of saying the biblical worldview is better than the other one. It's saying, let's go deeper. What you find here is that mind-body is a unit. You can't separate mind from body. Remember, every point here touches every other point. So if I put mind here, it already has body with it. So mind-body medicine is going to a deeper level of reality in which mind and matter are inseparable. They're a continuum. But that's the point for every concept here. That's where we're illiterate, because if I take any word, when Descartes took the I am, he found already thinking, consciousness. And from consciousness, he found being, I am being. And from being, he found God. From being, he found time. And then he went on and he found his body back again in that space. Descartes, in the fifth meditation, he said, so do I have a body? Can I prove I have a body? He wasn't going back into the box. He was going from this meditation saying, can I retrieve all of the categories? And he was tapping it out. So it's not just a space-time continuum. It's not just the mind-body continuum. It's all a continuum. So if you take any one word, if you take time, and that's the one I want to start with, well, you should be able to tap out of time consciousness, being, and out of space, body, space, and from space you have consciousness. And you'll find the derivation of connectivity. So every concept encodes all the others, and there's an unbroken continuity. That's non-dual language. And we haven't learned it yet. Right? The great teachers have been speaking it. Right? If you study Dogen, the Zen master, he's saying mind-body, meditate on mind-body, and being time. He was speaking the hyphenated language. So when Einstein touched space-time, that was just the tip of the iceberg to say, oh, there's a space-time continuum. You can't separate space from time. As Newton did. It's space-time. Good move. And there's matter energy, matter and energy, so matter and energy change so that you could change matter into energy. He got that one. But he didn't go far enough, because if he saw that matter and energy in consciousness, so that the fundamental energy of the universe, logos, which is ultimate energy, is conscious energy. So when you go into the deep global worldview, you begin to see, wow, that's science, that's nature. Nature is a connected web of life, of interconnectivity. And every point touches every other. That's how you have non-locality. That's the butterfly effect. The butterfly effect is that the slightest movement of the wings of the butterfly in the rainforest of Brazil is directly connected right now to the hurricane we're having, or the tsunami that just happened, of interconnectivity. This in-the-box causation is linear and broken, and causation, holistic causation, or interconnectivity, means everything is causally interacting right now with everything else. That's the butterfly effect. And the whole universe is non-local. So you could be across the galaxies, and you could be in love and just having a thought with you, and you're connected right away in interconnectivity. So that's healing. And you're right, when you realize this, and you look at where are we in our culture, and who is educating, and what are we doing in our schools, how are we schooling our children, are we mutilating their minds, right, and then turning them out broken people, and you wonder, why can't they love, why can't they connect, why can't they have eating disorders, why do they need Ritalin, why do they have ADD, why can't they be all of these. And we don't get the connection. We're disconnected. That's the thing, when you disconnect an ego, you can't make the connections. So it feeds itself, and that's samsara. Samsara is repeating the vicious cycle. Because you don't have an integral mind, you can't see the integral truth, and so you keep repeating it, and there you go, century after century. And the teachers who come and says, hold it, 1 minute, may I ask a question? What about that? Right? Usually, take him out. Martin Luther King gets shot, Socrates, have a drink of hemlock, right? You kill them, because they're too threatening. Those who really question the box are very threatening, because they're saying your whole way of life is wrong, right? This is the way to ethics and being. This is the way to healing. If you want to be a whole being, you've got to heal your being. And that's well-being. Well-being is being well. So health is well-being, and being is an art of wisdom. And so you see, the seminar is wisdom and the healing arts. Wisdom has something to do with healing. It's not just a theory that you have. A theory is some story you get in here. But wisdom is living the truth, walking the talk. Like that runner who's running the run. When you're in wisdom, you're living the truth. You become one with the truth, you live it. And wisdom has to be lived. You have to walk it. And that's when you're healthy, that's when you come. Follow? So in a way, if you see this picture and you look at our culture, you could just, oh my God, the people are so desperately trying to get healthy and go natural and organic. And they're trying whatever foods they can. You spend so much more money for organic bananas, right? And go organic. Rather, you want whole foods, and you have a whole food markets, and and this is organic. Organic means organic. It means living, connectivity.
I'm laughing. Once, when I was with my teacher Bawa, and some organic fanatic came to him and said, "I only eat organic food." Blah 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 blah. And Bawa just chuckled and said, "The only organic thing I know is God."
Well, in a way, that's right. That's right.
It's just what you're saying.
That's right. I mean, I decided.
And I've never heard anyone say that other than him until now, when you're saying it.
Right. Well, I decided. So people ask, "Are you a vegetarian?" And I do eat meat, but when I eat meat, I eat it consciously. In the sense of it. That's just what Native Americans, when you kill the buffalo, you understand the sacrifice of life, and you eat. So in a way, if you realize it's all logos, and you have to kill plants too to eat. And it's all life, and life is organic, then the logic points to becoming a logosarian. So when Jesus says, from now on, you're eating logos. When you have this bread, don't eat reified bread, eat bread. Well, how are you going to eat bread when you can't eat from the ego? So what are you going to have to do? You have to give up the ego to love God. And and be in the Christ space. When you're in the Christ zone, then you can eat. And then you don't have eating disorders. So here again, I mean, look at do good science. Which scientists are saying that ego living may be the source of eating disorders? When all of the religions have been saying there's always a religion, Passover, and all of the religions, food is extremely important. Krishna says to Arjuna in the, people who eat from here eat sin. But when you sacrifice, he was teaching how to sacrifice. It was just the same point Jesus was making. Right? So the resurrection was the sacrifice of sacrificing, in that case for Jesus, sacrificing himself as an opening so that people can cross over, through that opening to reconcile and find. I mean, that's why for Christians, Christ is so important as a link. Christ is a weird being. You can't put, the whole point, you can't put Christ in the box. It doesn't wash. Because Christ is the infinite finite. Fully logos, fully human. And you've got to break out of the box to get that. And so that was an eating ritual. So all of the baptism, when you baptize, right, think about this. You don't baptize in water. Imagine what water is. When you get baptized, you're a new being. Well, which water are you talking about? Well, holy water. Well, what is that? Well, that's water that flows with God. That's God water. So when you get baptized or you drink pure water, or you go in the Ganges, Hindus now go in the Ganges, you look at it, this is polluted. Their bodies down, and people are going in there and going into complete purity, being purified in the Ganges. My name is Ganga, Gangadeen, right? Devotee of Ganga, right? And Ganga flows from the hair of Shiva, and that's a river, and you just go and bathe in the flow of Logos, and you're purified. That's water. See what I mean? So if you can go into the holy water, then you're purified, or you drink. You get the message, right? I'm showing you that every word that we've got is tainted. It's blocked. And when you release the power, most of all ourselves. So if there's one lesson you got from this session, is in terms of if there's a language of Logos, and how would it be like to say I am? How would it like to experience myself? What would it like to have my body wake up in the moment, right? So I can see and smell and taste and with consciousness. So the bottom line is consciousness rules. Consciousness matters. All of these traditions are saying one thing: we are as we mind. That's an ultimate global axiom. We are as we mind. What we are is what we mind. And if we mind this way, our being is different. If we mind this way, we are as we mind. Every medical school should have that, right? As the first teaching. And every citizen, every human being, what I'm suggesting is, and your question is right there, when you see this, you say, when have we been teaching our children the grammar of language and literacy? What are we doing in our best institutions of Haverford, Bryn Mawr, and Swarthmore? The best in the nation. Isn't Swarthmore number one? Right, and how much are you getting educated at Swarthmore in terms of the category structure of your predication and your predicability, right? And you are as your mind. And has anyone at Swarthmore gotten the technology of the integral grammar? Oh, there's no Swarthmore students here? I see. Well, that explains it. Any other questions? Yes.
It seems a problem to hope that, it seems problematic to hope that allopathic medicine will reach the low-dose stage, considering that the center of allopathic medicine is America, and America is the prime example of boxing in the ego. So I was just thinking, is there any hope that, this seems kind of contradictory to ask, but is there any hope that, so American doctors and American medical researchers are both boxed into the American ego and have this sort of American-like way of thinking and way of living, and they're sort of like that sort of American way, generally, like making that generalization given. Is there any chance that there could be another facet of them that, as a doctor, they could reach the logo stage, even though they're still sort of bound in by the ego?
I think that's a great question. I think that's what's happening to individual doctors, like John Kabat-Zinn, who is here for my forum on science and spirituality. I have a forum every year at Haverford to try and open this up for integral science. And John Kabat-Zinn was here last year. He's a graduate of Haverford, one of the leading medical, Massachusetts General Hospital, but he's also here at Jefferson Medical here. And so although he was trained, he began to see that meditation matters, literally. That's no pun. Meditation matters, right? And so he had to smuggle it in by, call it stress reduction. So that's how he started over there, and actually bringing in meditative techniques into the hospital, into the allopathic establishment, because there was no question it reduced stress, and therefore heart disease and all of that. So it broke the barrier, and now different medical colleges are doing that, okay? And there's a kind of revolution that's happening doctor by doctor, person, and most of all, I think what will get medicine out of the box is following the money. And if the patients are not going to the doctors, and more patients are not going into the allopathic as the only therapy, they're going on, it's like 80% of people in America, patients, are now seeking alternative therapies. When that happens, money speaks in its own terms. So that medical schools are now beginning, it's a lag, they're beginning to open up the doors to consciousness studies. Can prayer heal? Right? 20 years ago you couldn't do it. Now it's beginning at Johns Hopkins, Harvard. Right? I just interviewed on my television show Marilyn Schlitz, who came up with the book Consciousness and Healing. And she has about 40 frontier doctors. Dr. Posen should be one of them. Maybe he wasn't in this particular one. Like Larry Dossey, you know, you have on your reading list. He's one of the first persons there to speak on the, amongst those 40. And you go to these doctors all around. One is a chief physician down at Johns Hopkins, and he's saying, now, as a trained establishment doctor, before I go into that surgery, we want to pause for a minute and center ourselves, because the life of that patient, and he's saying this on screen in the DVD that goes with the book. And more doctors are just saying they have to recognize the facts. So here's the answer is, whatever establishment may be dominating for the moment, the truth is deeper and stronger and constantly wears down at it. And that's really what's happening. So it has no choice but to yield. There are revolutions in science. So when Newton had the grammar and it got picked up like an establishment fundamentalist grammar, and Einstein wrote his equations that shifted the lens of the Newtonian, you got Einstein's universe. You got a revolution in the 20th century. So that revolutions do happen in science, paradigm shifts. And what I'm suggesting is that it's reached a point with the people power, voting with their feet, as well as the truth closing in. Now, physics is recognizing non-locality. It's a non-local universe. They're trying to get the vocabulary for black holes of infinite gravity and what that does. And superluminary velocities faster than the speed of light to explain non-locality in nature. So the facts of nature are crushing in on any lens we have to force it open. See what I mean? So there are many forces acting under any regime to bring change. And so we're in the midst, on the cusp, I believe, of a profound revolution in culture to get out of the box and to finally reach into this space. A book that I'm working on for 10 years is called The Awakening of the Global Mind. It's very hard to write. Right? The Awakening of the Global Mind. I've written other books, Meditative Reason Towards Universal Grammar. I've presented this in my books. Between Worlds, The Emergence of Global Reason. Those have been published in many, many essays. But The Awakening of the Global Mind is retelling the story of culture as a story of the evolution of the logos in the human situation. And the storyline goes, we've reached a point where the double brackets are crumbling. I mean, the single brackets are crumbling, and we have no choice but to either stay here and perish or to advance into the next stage of our birthing, coming out of the cocoon and becoming human beings that we are. We have no choice. That's why I'm excited. And your generation has to be the swing generation. I tell that my kids, not to put pressure on you. It's not a matter of pressure. It's an exciting moment, actually, because it's been prepared for centuries. That's the point. A lot of sacrifice, right? Preparing the way. When you think of Martin Luther King, all of these, teachers, men and women, all through the centuries, have been preparing the way for this moment. And we've reached a point now, what's exciting is we can't go on this way. It's not sustainable. That's what sustainability means. It can't be sustained. Culture is not sustainable. So sustainability is a form of economy, right, in which that it feeds itself and it can last. And so survival is in the offing. We've reached a point on the planet where we cannot survive going on the way we've been going on. With the global warming, with all the crises on the planet and all the things we're facing, we have no choice. It's awaken or perish, right? And the reason why I feel we're going to awaken is because I have trust in the human intelligence. In the 11th hour, it's a shift. And it's not overnight, it's been long coming. I hope that gives you some sense of, of what's going on. And when you're looking at 3,000 years, you might say, it's going to take another 10, 15 years for medical schools to really open up, right? That seems so long. It's not long, right? Your generation, when you're 40 years old, I assume most of you are around 20 years from now, if the planet is still here, medical schools should be much more open. And it'll be through you, your generation going out there and being revolutionaries. The power of one. Each of you hold tremendous power when you realize it. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. Each person is a PowerPoint, and you can really change the entire field with your butterfly effect. You can create a tsunami of light and love on the planet through your power. That's what all the teachers are witnessing, right? So when you shut yourself down in the box, you're lost your power. But when you come out to be, when you out yourself, right, into your being, and with courage, there's no stopping the boundless resonance that you have to transform the world. That's what Gandhi illustrated, for example. That's what Jesus illustrated. Buddha. These teachers shook the world and changed history with their teaching. And each of us has that power to do that. So I'm very happy and optimistic in the midst of... Well, you understand, I'm not weird. I mean, you understand why I'm excited, right?
But in our press and in our media, you don't get a clue of this.
Well, I'm on Global Lens. Watch my TV show.
Right.
I'm on every Monday night, WYBE. I've been on 5 years, and that's why I'm on the air. Oh, no, it's a general broadcast. WYBE TV. I'm on and you look out for these great lectures. I have interviews on the air. Channel 35.
Yes.
But it's on cable as well. So here at Haverford, depending where the county line runs near the duck pond, so one is Haverford Township, one is Lower Merion. I think Comcast has 25. Adelphia, it's on 24. But you will find WYB. It has all the international. It has all the international BBC News before my show, Global Lens, Monday night, 7:30. 7:30 p.m. I'll be interviewing Deepak Chopra soon. For example, on Friday afternoon, I have to go interview the Oasis of Peace from Israel, where Palestinians and Jews are living together and defying, and it's called Oasis of Peace, and their representatives are coming, and I'm going to interview them in the show about the attempt to create peace, a culture of peace, and break the war zone. All right? So in every interview, I try to quietly, also called the Global Lens. This is the Global Lens. And my show is trying to very quietly, but out in public, model the deep wisdom to open that up. And people are watching.
You mentioned Dr. Consciousness and Healing.
Dr. Marilyn Schlitz. She was at Haverford last week for my show, and she is working with many, her books, Consciousness and Healing. Interviews 40 different people, many of on the reading list with Dr. Posner. Hear about the power of consciousness and healing. All of them. That's why 20 years ago that would never have happened, but now it's here. So something is happening in the culture. And people, heroes like Howard Posner, 25 years ago, when he was a lone wolf out there, on a radio show, interviewing Andrew Weil and others before they were known, he's been holding the space for integral healing. So he's my hero.
It's lucky nobody shot him.
Pardon me?
It's lucky he was not shot.
That's right. That's right. You're lucky you're not shot. Any further questions? It's up to now.
Great talk.
You're welcome. Good. Thank you. Have a good life.